So I was like 6 years old. Me, my mom, my stepdad, and my two half-brothers lived in a house that we were renting in New Jersey. Our area never really had much wildlife around, besides deer. One night, we hear a bunch of howling in our backyard. So my mom tried to figure out what the sound was on her phone. Apparently the sound that she was hearing was a fox in danger. So my mom told me and my brothers not to go outside in the backyard until they could get the fox out of there if it was still there. I didn't listen, and on the next day I went to the backyard, and the fox wasn't a problem. It was dead, with a giant cut from its stomach to its neck. It didn't look like an animal killed it. It was way too surgical. We never found anyone or anything else in the backyard, but man, that really freaked me the fuck out. Thank God we moved out of there the next month. I'm a 12-year-old boy, and one night my mom and me were at home, and my mom wanted to go out with her sister, and I wanted her to go have fun with her sisters, so she went, leaving me home alone. I was watching TV when I heard a voice. I muted the TV and listened. Then I heard what sounded like a drunk man talking to himself, but what he said still haunts me to this day. "Hey kid, I got this candy in my jacket if you come out of the house." I was very terrified, but I also have 3 German Shepherds and 3 Bulldogs who are very protective over me and my mom, so I didn't think he would try to break in. I decided to call my sister's husband, and he raced over in his car, and when he got there, the guy ran into the woods, and my brother-in-law pulled out his gun and fired into the woods. Sadly, he missed a sick fuck, and my brother-in-law called the cops and explained everything. But the cops couldn't find him, and I still live at that home. I'm now armed, just to be safe in case something like this happens again. About 3 months ago, I was babysitting my younger siblings while my parents were out. It was around 8 p.m., and everyone was watching TV while I was in the room folding laundry. Note that this room was located in the back of the house. While I was putting the clothes away, I heard a knock at the window. Without thinking, I opened the blinds a little instantly, and my soul left my body when I was face to face with a pair of wide, hazel eyes staring back at me. I let out an ear-piercing scream and ran into the living room to grab my siblings and take them into my parents' room to hide. While my siblings were confused and asking why I screamed, the back door was practically shaking, as I could also hear someone banging on the living room windows. My sister was already on the phone with the police, and my brothers were hiding under my parents' bed while I was in the hallway with a long kitchen knife trying somehow to protect them. Minutes later, the banging and shaking stopped, and I could hear 2 people jumping out of the front yard gates. The police arrived 5 minutes later and took our statements. After that incident, my parents got a dog from the local shelter named Buddy, who we love very much. 2 weeks later, I was alone in the house with the dog getting ready for school, since school started for me at 10 a.m. because the underclassmen were taking the state exams and the high school seniors like me came to school later. I was feeding Buddy when I hear the front gate shaking, then footsteps walking quickly next to the house. Someone was trying to open the back door. Instantly, Buddy's ears picked up, and he began growling and barking like crazy. I was about to call the police when the person fled. Unfortunately, the police never caught the person, so I soon forgot what happened. Then a week ago, someone broke into my dad's car and stole the radio. Yesterday, I was up at 7 a.m. cleaning the living room, and decided to have some light in the house by opening the curtains, when sometime later, I see a truck slowly approaching my house. I hid behind the bookshelf so that the driver wouldn't see me through the living room windows. The truck windows were very tinted, and I felt like the driver was staring at me, as if he knew where I was in the house. He sped off quickly after that. I honestly don't know what's going on, and I hope it doesn't escalate. It all started and ended the day after I took the last final at this community college. I don't know if he was a stalker or if it was a break-in gone weird. So from the beginning, I was so nervous that I was going to fail this one class and was not going to be able to receive my AA degree. Later in the day, I was out in the pool at my apartment complex with some friends and my roommate when I checked my phone and saw that I passed my class. I got so excited and I told everyone that we were celebrating because I was the last one to have a final. It was 3 days before I got to walk and graduate with this degree that I decided we should have some fun before we all went our separate ways. As it got later in the night, we decided not to go out and to stay in. We invited a couple people over and went on with the night. Around 2 in the morning, people started to leave. The only people left were my 2 roommates, both of the people that they were dating, and one other friend. We were still messing around, and because our apartment was on the first floor, right next to the pool, we went to go night swimming. As soon as we were done, I was ready just to hang out and be in for good that night. My roommates and other friends left to go somewhere else for a while, which was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary for me to be home alone. I got some food and went to my room to hang out until they got back. The way my room was set up in the apartment is that it's all the way back furthest away from the front door and patio door. My room is behind the kitchen and you have to go through the whole apartment to get there. Because our apartment was the front of the complex near the pool, it was near the front gate, and at times the gate was left open because it was broken. I had never had an issue with living this close up front until this night. My room had this one big window, and it's easy to see into my room when I don't have the blinds or curtains shut. I had a closet with mirrored doors, which if you look through the window you could see every part of my room in it. So while I was waiting for my friends to get back, I fell asleep, the last time looking at the clock being around 3:30 in the morning. Also a key part in this, my bedroom light was on when I went to sleep. I woke up around 5:30 a.m. There were slow flashes going off. It was like a strobe light in the corner of my room. I woke up really confused and thought that it was my friends coming back to mess with me. Once my eyes got adjusted, because the room is now dark, I realized that the fact that my friends were not messing with me, but there was a single man, at least 6'1", wearing a green Nike hoodie with the hood on in the corner of my room by my closet. He was holding the phone and taking pictures of me. Mind you, I had on teeny shorts with my legs hanging out of the covers. I don't think he realized that I had woken up, and when it really sunk in I said, "What the fuck?" And instead of coming at me or running out of my room, this man just put his phone down and walked out of my room, not saying anything, not in a panic, just walked out. Me being a dumbass, I ran after him saying, "Hey." I tried to follow him out, but once I got out of the front door, I didn't see him anywhere and ran back in to wake up my roommates, asking if they were messing with me. When they said no, I called the police. I looked around my room and saw the only thing missing was my laptop that was on my desk chair in the far corner of the room. The weirdest part about that was the fact that the laptop was in the furthest part of my room with my door closed, and outside in the kitchen on the counter were 3 MacBooks, 2 wallets, and at least $300 worth of speakers. But the only thing missing in the whole apartment was my laptop. Later I found out that the front door and the patio door were never locked when everyone got back, and the police couldn't find this guy, nor my computer. What made this worse was that there was a disk from my camera in the computer, with all my personal photos now accessible to this guy. Some things I saw a couple days later while I was getting ready to move out freaked me out even more. Like I said earlier, if you looked in my window you could see my closet mirrors and see just about anything in my room. One thing that was super noticeable was my tapestry. It was very distinct and a different kind of tapestry. It had wolves howling to the moon and it's all black and white. One day when I was packing up my car and it was starting to get dark, I looked up and noticed the apartment above mine through the blinds in the window having the same exact tapestry as the one that was in my room. What creeps me out even more is the fact that I had these little lights I put on that I got from my mom because she knows that my favorite color is purple. In the room above, the lights and the fan were switched out for purple ones. As if I wasn't creeped out enough, an all-black cat came up to the window, and my stomach started to feel weird because a year before, I got this baby kitten that was all black. In the end, this guy was never found, and I never saw his face, which freaks me out to this day, and I hope I never come across him again. I never got my black laptop back, never found my SIM disk to my camera. The best advice I have to anyone is no matter what, always lock your doors. You never know what you could wake up to. To preface this, I live in an apartment block where there's a ground floor apartment and a first floor apartment. Each apartment has its own front door that faces the courtyard area. The apartments are more like large houses that have been split into 2 bedrooms, 1 bath units, with a large opening for the kitchen living room area. I live on the ground floor. The apartments are surrounded on each side by alleyways, and there are large gates which used to have coded padlocks on them, which do not work anymore. I tried to get the property management company out to fix them on multiple occasions with no luck. This means the gates are effectively left open for everyone and anyone to gain access to the front doors from 2 busy streets. Last night at approximately 2:30 a.m., my doorbell rang. I woke up from a deep sleep, and without thinking to check my phone, I quickly wrapped a blanket around myself and went to open the door. I assumed it could have been my sister or a family member who was unable to contact me and arrived due to an emergency. I was wrong. I looked through the frosted glass on the door and could see a light shining through. I opened the door and there's a man standing there whom I have never seen before and knew was not a resident of the block of apartments. He was wearing a headlamp and asked me to open the bin storage for him, which is a shared space only accessible to residents through calling a phone number to unlock it. All the residents have access, so it was even more obvious that he didn't live there. It generally frightened me to have a stranger standing at my door at 2:30 a.m. asking me for access to the bin storage for reasons I didn't find out. I was too scared to actually ask for any information or what he was putting in the bins. I can't see the bin storage from my front door, so I couldn't actually see if he had bags to put out there or what he was disposing of. I was pretty much frozen on the spot, holding the door tightly and not opening it more than a few inches. I blindly accepted his request to open the bins as I couldn't physically bring myself to decline. I told him it was open for him, swiftly locked the door, and pushed my 15 kg kettlebell against it. My mind was absolutely racing and my anxiety hit the roof. I was physically shaking and could barely string a sentence together as I tried to explain to my partner what had just happened when I got back into bed. We got up together to sit in the living room for a cup of tea to try to settle my nerves. We stayed up for about an hour and a half, talking through what happened and trying to explain it or come up with scenarios that made the ordeal make more sense in a positive light, given that all the ideas in my mind were darkly negative. I don't know if he was scoping out the place to break in. He knows there's an adult female living in one of the apartments, presumably alone, as he didn't see anyone else when I opened the door. About an hour after the incident, my partner went outside to check the bin storage. The door had been left open, indicating that someone had in fact been in there. He didn't notice anything suspicious or out of place, and came back inside. We stayed up until the paranoia began to subside and exhaustion took over. I eventually had myself convinced that if it had been 10:30 p.m. or 6:30 a.m., it wouldn't have been nearly as suspect as 2:30 a.m. So I was trying to picture the scenario as though it was a normal time. What won't go away though is the way the man greeted me when I opened the door. Through the gap, the first words I heard were, "Hello, love." It still freaks the fuck out of me hours later. I unfortunately have a plethora of these kinds of stories. I've encountered a ton of creeps as a teen, and this is about one of them. Back in high school, I lived pretty close to my school building. It was maybe a 15 to 20 minute walk, at the most. In my senior year, I had 2 free periods at the end of my day instead of class. I took extra courses in night school and summer school the year before, so I usually start walking home around 1:30 or so. The area I used to live in was extremely quiet to the point where, depending on certain weather or time of day, it was unnerving to walk the streets. It was suburbia, but the kind where people barely came out of their houses. It was a super rainy day, the sky was murky, and no one was outside, not even for a walk, despite it being daylight. I had my headphones in, listening to music on the way home. I was nearing a small library around the corner from my house when out of the corner of my eye I noticed this large van with tinted windows. No one was parked near the library because it was closed that day. Odd, I thought, that someone was choosing to park there now. I continued walking until I heard a muffled sound. Curious, I took one of my earbuds out and looked up to my right. The front seat of the van had rolled down their window, and I could see the face of a middle-aged man with a mustache. I was confused, wondering, was he talking to me? And he drove slowly alongside me, presumably repeating what I didn't hear earlier. "Are you alone?" An alarm immediately went off in my head. There was no one in sight, and I was a small teenager who didn't know what to do. I panicked, put my earbud back in, and as I turned around promptly to walk the other way, he began to glare intensely at me and turned his van around to follow me. My music was paused, and I was pretending I didn't hear him. I had 2 choices, the elementary school coming up ahead, or back where I came from. The back of the elementary school was hard to reach quickly, and I was scared that I'd corner myself in. I kept walking quickly, not looking at the van following me. I was on the way back to my high school. Once I got closer, the van sped away quickly. It was getting towards the end of the day there, and people were starting to leave. Almost hyperventilating, I got to the office to tell the secretary everything that just happened. I got my mom to pick me up, and as we drove home, I described the van to her. We reported it to the police, and the next day, I was picked up early from school. The smart woman she is decided to drive by the library that day, around the time I usually walked home. It was quiet out, as usual. Then, she saw the van with tinted windows, as I described it to her. It was parked, waiting for someone. Waiting for me. We gave the license plate to the police, and explained our concerns. When we checked back in on them, they told us that they found the owner of the van. He was renting the basement of a house nearby the library. He said he was waiting there to pick up his kids. The elementary school wouldn't have been let out until nearly 4 p.m., so why was he hanging out there around 1 p.m.? It was clearly a lie, but the police said that they'll keep an eye on him, and they weren't in their rights to do anything else. Frustratingly, the last update we got was that he moved shortly after, with no consequences. So I just turned 18 a few weeks ago, and due to the pandemic and all, I wouldn't, or rather couldn't, throw a big party. I just had 2 of my closest friends over. Let's call them Melissa and Carla. They both were 18 as well. We planned on having a fun evening the night before I turned 18, and just made some fancy dinner and have some fun, and that's what we did. We didn't have any alcohol, so when 12 o'clock rolled around, we celebrated some, and I unwrapped their gifts, one of which was one of those realistic looking sealed plushies, which was kind of a joke because I went through a phase when I found a fat seal incredibly adorable and got Instagram ads for those things all the time. Anyway, we were really hyped, and we decided to go walk with our music box and the plushie at about 1 in the morning. Just for context, we live in a relatively small, rural town, but it's next to a big lake, so there's a bunch of tourists in the summer, and we also have multiple clinics around, one for eating disorders, and the other one, a rehab center. It's usually really safe and quiet, especially at night. So we dance and sing along loudly on the empty streets, just having fun with it. We passed a few people, but they seemed normal and nice. But generally, it's really empty and deserted on the streets. as we approached this big empty parking lot, which we needed to pass by in order to get back home. I noticed a guy in a dark hooded pullover coming from the parking lot across the street to the side that we were walking on. We turned the music down as he passed, and he greeted us briefly in passing, and we greeted him back. He looked to be in his mid-30s, but seemed totally non-threatening and normal to us at that point. We thought nothing more of it as we walked and turned the music back up. Now, in order to get home, we had to go through some small patch of woods where there was no streetlights or houses nearby. As we started approaching the area, a few minutes after we met the man, we suddenly started hearing talking behind us. We realized that someone was walking about 10 meters behind us. At first, we thought he was just talking to someone on the phone, but it was pretty dark and we couldn't see if that was the case. When we passed one of the last streetlights before the patch of woods, we realized it was the same guy that had walked past us a few minutes before, who was walking in the opposite direction as us, and he would have had to turn around after he passed us in order to be right behind us. That was when we really started to get creeped out. We also realized that he wasn't on the phone, but because of the loud music we had on, we couldn't make out what he was saying. So in that moment, I, for some reason, figured it was a good idea to say, "I always have a knife with me," in a loud, speaking tone to my friends. They later told me that they actually bought it, but in reality, we had nothing with us in the case that we would need to defend ourselves. I kind of figured that maybe it would scare the guy off or something, but it sadly didn't. So there was one last house, which was actually an inn, that we would have to pass before we had to go through the patch of woods. I said to my friends that maybe he was staying there, but we all agreed that if he kept following us after that point, it couldn't be a coincidence, and he was indeed following us. In hindsight, we should have just turned around at that point and stayed in the well-lit, populated area, but I guess we weren't thinking that clear. So we passed the inn, and he was still following us. One of us turned our phone flashlight on as there were no more street lights and it was pitch black where we were going. We kept turning around and checking if he was still behind us, each time increasing our walking speed until we were nearly running, but he kept getting closer and closer. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I was scared for my life. I kept thinking that he could have some kind of weapon on him or something. Then one of my friends, Melissa, stopped and turned around. Carla and me stood a few meters behind her. Immediately the guy approached her, asking her if we had any alcohol or cigarettes. She answered in a totally sober tone that we in fact didn't have anything with us. He took a few steps towards her, asking again if we really didn't have anything with us that we could give him. Melissa answered more firmly this time that we didn't have anything. This guy really seemed desperate. At this point, Melissa said that she was ready to kick him in the balls if he took one step closer to her. She actually does kickboxing and knows how to defend herself, but still, he was a grown man and probably had more power than an 18-year-old girl. Carla and me were just frozen and didn't know what to do. I just kept standing there, saying nothing. He asked Melissa if we lived nearby or if we were here on vacation, to which she answered that we live in the area, as she figured it's better that he thinks we know the area and the people well and wouldn't get any ideas. Luckily for us, after a few more times reassuring him that we also didn't have anything for him at my home, I think the guy realized that he was getting nowhere with us and decided to just turn around and walk back the way he came from, leaving us half scared to death as we sped walk back to my house, glancing behind us every few seconds to check if he had decided to follow us home after all, which luckily he didn't. We arrived safely at my home, still scared, and I double checked that I locked the doors behind us. I couldn't really fall asleep that night, always thinking that I heard something outside. So creepy man who decided to follow 3 18-year-old girls into the dark woods in the middle of the night to ask them for alcohol and cigarettes. What the heck were you thinking? Second post here. I had forgotten about this particular encounter until this morning. I was about 14 and in middle school when this happened. My mom picked me up from a sleepover and we went to our local Dollar General to pick up a few things. While inside, a man entered the store. maybe in his late 20s to early 30s. He seemed to be aimlessly walking around. People do that all the time in the store, so I didn't think anything of it and wasn't paying much attention. As a teenage girl that I was probably on my phone or something. Inside the store, the aisles are pretty close together, so seeing into the next one or listening to things even 2 or 3 aisles away was pretty easy. While as my mom and I were walking down the aisle, I occasionally saw this guy walking towards or around us, giving us glances but never actually coming near us, and I would hear him slowly shuffling behind us or the next aisle over. It is a small store with limited amount of space, so once again, I didn't really give it a second thought. Then, it was like every time we went to turn the corner or change aisles, he was darting to another aisle as if he didn't want us to see that he was there. I'd get a feeling that I was being watched, so I turned around and see him doing the same thing. Sometimes I was able to see him out of the corner of my eye, just peeking around the corner or at the end of the aisle, just watching. It was the creepiest thing ever at 14 years old. I remember my mom telling me to grab something from the other end of the store, and I refused to do it in fear of running into this guy without an adult present. As we were checking out, I saw him make a beeline for the exit. He was gone from the parking lot when we went to leave as well. I never said anything to my mom about it, as nothing actually happened, and there's really nothing that could be done. Well, sometime later, maybe a month or so, my mom gets a call from the sheriff's department, and they say to her that I need to come down immediately, because I may have been a witness to a crime. Naturally, I panicked, as any teenager would do, because at that point, I had forgotten about the previous incident. The officer rolled the clip from the Dollar General with us on the footage, as well as the dude. It confirmed my fears that day, and showed him literally following us around the store the whole time we were in there. And as soon as I turned around, he tried to hide. Later in the video, he was actually touching himself as he was watching me and my mom. I was disgusted. Turns out, right around the same time, he was arrested for exposing himself to an 8-year-old girl in the same store. I was completely freaked out and didn't want to think about what could have happened if I wandered off alone in that store that day. I was on my way home from work one day. The time was around 9 p.m., so I was rushing. Because of the time, there were only a few people around. As I was getting close to home, I had to pass by a gas station. I got close and looked up. I spotted a dark green van parked by the road. I started having stupid thoughts about how if someone opened the van door and dragged me in, no one would see me. I brushed off the weird thought and passed by the van without anything happening. I was a block away from my house now and saw the headlights from behind me, but they never passed me. I was paying close attention and waited for the car. All of a sudden, a loud car honk rang through the air. I turned around to see the van stopping right beside me on the road. The car that honked was behind the van, a frustrated driver wondering why the van was going so slow. As I looked up to see the driver of the van violently pulled away and sped down the road. I was scared. As this happened, my first instinct was to memorize the license plate number. My house was at the end of the block, and I was sure I saw the van pass the block and went off. I was almost at my door when for some reason I turned around because I felt like I was being watched. That's when I spotted the van across the road. It couldn't have been the same van, I thought. I couldn't see the color clearly as there weren't any streetlights across from my house. The van was parked as if it was going towards the gas station. That's when my eyes adjusted and I could just make out the license plate. It was the same van. I was shocked and looked up to see the driver. There were 2 men sitting in the front. There was a light on inside the van that was illuminating their faces. They looked angry. They were both looking right at me. It seemed like they were talking about something while still keeping their eyes on me. I had enough at this point and unlocked my door and ran in, slamming it and locking it. I ran in looking and calling for my mom. No one responded, so I was worried that the men would come in and kidnap me. I slowly crept to the window and looked out and found that the van was no longer there. This happened a few months ago, and I've been careful whenever I see a van near me. This happened to me when I was 15. I was in the city center by myself after finishing school and checking libraries and the video game stores. When I got bored, I went to the bus stop, which was about 10 minutes away from the shopping zone. At one point, I had to cross a big street, and while I was waiting for the stoplight to change, I felt an unknown man really near me. He was maybe around 30, short, with his face all red. He had balding blonde hair, and his clothes were dirty. I felt his breath on me, but I was just ignoring it, thinking that he was just waiting to cross, like everyone else. He waited alongside me for a few minutes without saying a thing, and again I just ignored it. When I was near the bus stop, he started talking to me. "Hi, what's your name?" A bit of small talk, and I answered him. I told him I was going home, and something sparked his eyes. He told me that he was coming with me. I said that my parents would be waiting for me, so he told me, "Oh, I'm sure they won't mind me sleeping with you tonight." I freaked out on the inside. That's when I realized he would follow me everywhere no matter what I said. I stopped answering him, and he asked me for my phone number and everything. Then the bus came. He got up and followed me. When I was about to pay for my ticket, I just thought to myself, no way, did a U-turn and started running away, leaving him at the bus. He didn't follow me. I went to the previous bus stop to take the next bus, waited for it in a hyperventilated state, but luckily I didn't see him again. I was driving around town late today, around 3 a.m., with a friend of mine, just cruising and talking about random stories. I noticed a car behind me, following me closely and aggressively. It was weird because I was driving calm and slow, without bothering anyone. I immediately noticed and figured something was wrong, so I took a right at the light. I noticed the same car followed me. I kinda made an abrupt but stupid decision and took the next right, which ended up being a dead end. This didn't stop the car from following me, which I thought it would. At this point, I was a bit confused and worried as to why someone would follow us this late at night. I went to the end of the dead end and quickly made a broken U-turn as the other car did the same. However, the car stopped for a second and basically had us pinned in. At this point, I got a glimpse of an old lady looking and smiling weirdly at us. I was confused as to what she wanted from us. She rolled down her window, and I did as well. She's laughing and smiling weirdly, making me very uncomfortable. She states how she's putting us both on the FBI extortion list, and how we'll both amount to nothing before she sped off. I didn't say a word as I was confused and shocked as to what was going on. I still don't know what the whole ordeal was or who this old lady was. I don't even live near this area, and all I was doing was having a calm drive at 3 a.m. with a friend to clear our thoughts. It all happened so fast and unexpected, and it was just too weird to grasp. The car hadn't followed us for long, I'd say roughly 5 minutes, give or take. I make sure to watch my rearview mirror at all times, so I always notice when something odd or someone is following too closely. It was weird to say the least, but also confusing. This is my first post, and something happened a week ago. My blood still runs cold when I think about it. Keep in mind, this isn't like any of the really scary stories on here, but it scared me, and was definitely out of the ordinary. My brother wanted to get a drink from a place both of us loved to go. It was gonna close soon, and he had work to do, so I went by myself. It wasn't very late, but it was already dark, and my parents had drummed into me since birth about the dangers of walking alone at night. I was kind of nervous that day, and even thought I've done it many times before. So I went and got both drinks, and for some reason, I didn't get a bag. I was walking along with both hands full. Bad idea. As I'm walking towards the street where my house was, I suddenly become aware of two men very close to me. One was in front of me, wearing a maroon pullover, and the other one was behind me, wearing a gray zipped up hoodie with the hood pulled up. I only turned around for a flash of a second, so I couldn't describe his face to you. I was weirded out because I was walking between them and was beginning to feel uncomfortable, like they were trying to herd me. Just as I was telling myself that I was clearly overreacting, I came across a garage that was down an alleyway, and a black Subaru was coming out. I had time to cross before they reached me. The person inside clearly wasn't counting on me doing that, so they swung around and parallel parked next to me, at most 2 feet away. So now, I was between the three men and a wall. When I saw the door open, I thought that was the end for me. I bolted and didn't stop running until I reached my house. So yeah, black Subaru driver, gray hoodie, and maroon pullover guy. Let's not meet. I live in a safe neighborhood in the Bay Area. We are lucky to have numerous outdoor parks nearby, which have been a saving grace since COVID started. Since gyms are closed, I've taken to running outside, and oftentimes I'll be running in the early evening. It's cooler, there are fewer people, and less crowds. Makes it a lot easier to run, especially in COVID times. I like decompressing after a stressful workday. As the days have been getting shorter, even though I try to start my runs when it's still light out, sometimes it does mean that it's dark during the latter half of my run. One day when I didn't have much daylight, I was sticking to running loops in the park closest to my home, which is well lit. I ran there all the time and have never felt unsafe until one night, perhaps a month or two ago. On that night, I was running my usual circular route in the long, skinny park that perhaps is a mile long. It had just gotten dark when an intimidating looking man dressed in all black, baggy clothing appeared from the grassy wooded area. He approached me while I was running on the sidewalk, the loops around the park, and started jogging next to me while calling out to me. I had my headphones in and I couldn't make out exactly what he was saying, but it was catcalling of some sort. Unnerved, I turned my music up and tuned him out and run faster, thinking he would leave me alone. I was wrong. He began running faster, pretty much in sync with me and parallel to me on the grassy part of the panhandle, so a smaller circumference of the loop I was running. I had just turned the corner of the end of the panhandle loop, so there was nowhere I could go to escape, and I began to panic because there weren't others around. And this section of the panhandle I was in was not particularly well lit. After rounding the end of the loop, still panicked, with this man still chasing me, I saw an older white man with AirPods in. He was walking up ahead on the path. I neared him. I slowed my run to a walking pace with him, but just a little bit behind him, so he did not know I was there. But I had effectively positioned him between the man and myself. Seeing this, the man chasing me also slowed down, but at this point he had already ran a bit ahead and couldn't slow down or come closer to me without raising the suspicion of the oblivious Samaritan I was using as a human shield. He began jogging ahead on the path in front of us, continuously looking back at me, only somewhat deterred. I kept walking in the pace with the Samaritan, all thoughts of continuing my run over. Focus on trying to figure out how I was going to get back home safely. We walked like this for perhaps a couple minutes until my cross-street exit approached. The man had jogged ahead, further now, but kept looking back at me as if he was waiting for the oblivious Samaritan to go wherever he was headed, presumably assuming that I would have to continue my run on the path towards him. At my cross-street intersection, the Samaritan just happened to turn left, which was the opposite direction where I needed to go. So I took it as my cue to peel right and sprint home as fast as I could, praying that there was enough distance between me and the harasser to lose him. I don't think I've ever ran so fast in my life. I made it home safely and didn't see him on my block when I finally got to my apartment. So at least he doesn't know where I live, if he did in fact continue trying to follow me. I want to pretend like nothing bad would have happened had the oblivious Samaritan not been there, but I really got bad gut vibes and was just so sketched out by this guy. How bold and persistent can someone be to chase a solo female that is running in a city park at night for a fair amount of time, no less? I can't imagine he just wanted to chit chat. If he did, he needs to seriously reconsider his tactics. I went to a small school. There were 8 girls in my class. It was a bit chilly out, so none of them wanted to go hang out after school, which was the usual plan on Fridays, as there was an ice cream shop about 15-minute walk from our school. However, my best friend stepped up and we agreed to go alone. There was no problems at first. The town is small, friendly, clean, and our parents gave us permission to go, even though it was just the 2 of us. It wasn't long until we noticed a white van trailing behind us. I distinctly remembered being told to avoid white vans at a young age, so I grew up terribly afraid of them. My friend and I laughed because we noticed it at the exact same moment, and I told her I was afraid of them. We picked up our pace, but so did the van. We didn't want to seem like scaredy cats, so we stopped, but so did the van. We began, along with the van, to inch forward, but eventually the van picked up speed and came even closer to us. It was terrifying. I grabbed my friend's wrist and with a painful smile told her to go along with me. I held her hand and walked up to the front door of the nearest house, fiddled with my purse for a non-existent key as we carried on an equally non-existent conversation. The van stopped right in front of us, and a scuffy man driving it rolled down his window and stared at us. Just then, my friend's mom drove up and asked if we wanted a ride. The van immediately sped off. We didn't tell my mom what happened right away. We took it lightheartedly, but as someone who grew up afraid of kidnappings, it was terrifying. When I was 15 years old, my friend and I, both female, used to walk from school to her house, about a 30-minute walk, on Fridays afternoons to start our weekends. We usually stopped at the sub shop in town for an early dinner to eat while we played video games and hung out. After we got our sandwiches, we walked outside and continued to our house, about 15 more minutes. Outside of the sub shop, there's a man sitting on a bench outside the shop who I didn't see when we walked in. He was really tall and muscular, around 6'5", pale and bald, probably in his early to mid-30s, and very intimidating wearing his bright orange sweatshirt. The hairs on the back of my neck instantly stood up as soon as I saw him. I noticed right away that after we passed him, he got up from the bench and started walking behind us. Not so weird, maybe just going his way. But what made me instantly realize that this dude wasn't right was that he was holding his phone to his ear, but not talking at all. This was just before smartphones became a thing, so it wasn't like he was just swiping along on Tinder or checking Instagram. In this time, if you had a flip phone out and clearly weren't talking to someone, that was weird because that was the only thing you did with those cell phones. We actually spoke to people. So weird now, right? He did this for so long that he couldn't have been listening to his voicemail. I had a gut feeling that something was wrong, so I stopped walking and pretended to fumble around with something in my purse, so the man ended up in front of us and no longer following behind us. I tell my friend why I pretended and stopped walking, and she kind of blew me off, as if I was being paranoid. We start walking again, and there's a gas station up ahead. You can either walk across the gas station to the main road, or go down a side road around the gas station that will also eventually lead you to the main road. Just a longer route. My friend and I cut through the gas station, and the man went around and ended up being behind us again. He was still holding his phone to his ear, but not speaking. At this point, I'm eternally freaked out. I know he's following us, but I'm trying to play it cool and come up with a plan. while my friend still doesn't take me seriously. We get to a turn that's a shortcut to my friend's house. Now, this road is pretty remote. Cars usually don't drive down there often, and there isn't a house for quite some time. But it was the fastest way to get to my friend's house. Just past the road was a large shopping center. I told my friend that if we started walking down this remote road and the man follows, that he's 100% following us because no one goes down this road, really ever, and that I would just book it to the closest store in the shopping center. I looked behind me to check where the man is, and he somehow got significantly closer to us, and of course, started walking down the road. We made eye contact, and he gave me the creepiest grin. I instantly started running with my friend following me, and we ran into a Rite Aid, while the guy continued to follow, but he doesn't go in the store. We get into the store, and the cashier takes notice that we are freaked out and asks what's wrong, so we tell her. She asks if we need the police, but we decline, and I just call my dad to pick us up and drop us off at my friend's house. My dad arrives about 10 minutes later with a cashier clerk keeping an eye on us, and the man was nowhere to be found. My dad wanted to find the guy, but my dad was older in his 60s, and this man was in his 30s and huge, so he definitely would have beaten my dad up, or worse. So I just begged for him to get in the car and get away from here. I was only 15 in hindsight, and we should have reported it to the cops. Here's the creepiest part of the story. As we were getting in the car, I see the man pop out from the parking lot from behind a parked car and started walking the other way. This guy was definitely waiting for us to come out of the store, follow us, and do God knows what. I didn't say anything because I didn't want my dad to try to fight him and have something bad happen, but it just confirmed that this creep was following us and planning on doing some harm. Thankfully, my friend and I were fine and we never saw the guy again, but my friend told her friend about the incident, and she said that she knew the guy because he lives near her and that he's definitely a creep who has had multiple complaints against him. I haven't heard of or seen him since, and I hope he never did anything to harm anyone. I still think about the story 12 years later, and there's a reason I'm so aware of my surroundings at all times, especially when I'm walking alone. To start off with some background, I'm a female, and at the time this happened, I was 12 years old. I lived in a quiet suburb in South Carolina at the time, and used to spend hours just walking my dog around the neighborhood because there wasn't much else to do. At the time, we had a 70-pound basset hound named Rufus, which kind of looked like a sawed-off St. Bernard. So I was walking him late in the afternoon in the fall, and it started to get dark. I was on the other end of the neighborhood from my house when I first saw a beat-up, rusty red pickup truck just kind of driving around. I didn't think a whole lot about it because it's the South, so pickup trucks are all over the place around here. I saw the truck cross the street I was gonna pass and then come back out the other end, further down, and go back the way I came from. To give you an idea of the neighborhood, it wasn't set up like regular blocks, more like a main road and a bunch of roads that looped around and came back to the main road. At first I figured this guy was lost or something, and still didn't think much of it. But as I was getting closer to my house and it was getting darker, I saw the truck again. Another thing about my neighborhood was, even though there were a lot of houses, everybody pretty much kept to themselves in their house for the most part. So there wasn't really anyone outside this time of night, even though it was still fairly early. So I come out of the neighborhood onto the main road to my house, and the truck is there again, this time just parked on the side of the road, facing the road I came out from. I turned onto the road to my house, and it started moving, driving slowly behind me with the lights out. Now, if you know anything about a basset hound, they're not the most threatening kind of dogs. They're short and stubby, with big ears and a goofy face, so even if Rufus was a big dog, he wasn't exactly the greatest guard dog. They also didn't walk very fast, and tend to trip over their ears when they run. So I was stuck with him setting a pace, and with him weighing as much as I did, it's not like I could reach down and pick him up, or try to run or anything. So here I am, walking down the dark road in the quiet neighborhood, with my slow-ass dog, and this creepy truck behind me. I knew I couldn't really run from it, and I doubted that anyone would hear me if I tried to scream or something if they came after me, so I finally came up with a plan, even if it was probably a stupid one. When I got to one of the handful of streetlights on the street, I stopped and turned around and just stared the truck down. The truck stopped moving and just kind of sat there about 30 feet away from me, like it was trying to look like it parked or something. I stood there and stared at the truck for what felt like forever, but it was probably around 2 or 3 minutes. After a while, the truck started moving again, turned on its lights, and turned off down another road. I booked it to someone's backyard and took the backyards the rest of the way home. I never told my mom about this creepy truck because I knew she would probably freak out and wouldn't let me take the dogs out alone anymore. This happened a few days ago. It was about 10 p.m. and it was trash night. I had a lot of homework, so I didn't end up taking the trash out earlier. My mom came in and told me to take the trash down to the side of the road, where we always do. For context, we have a church behind our house, and it has a parking lot and a shed right behind our garage. We set our trash cans up against the garage, close to the parking lot. Anyways, I went outside to grab the cans, and noticed a dingy, busted up looking van with 2 doors in the back. I've seen this van before, and for around a month, it was always parked at the other end of the parking lot. It was parked right beside the shed, big back doors facing me. This was not a church van. It was very dirty and rusted, nor did it have any logo. I was standing near my garage, not quite at the trash cans yet, and I had a really bad gut feeling. Something just didn't feel right. I looked closer at the van and noticed the silhouette of a person's head in the driver's seat. I couldn't identify this man or woman because it was dark. This is when my fight or flight senses kicked in. I ran inside because I didn't feel safe and told my mom about it. She said I was overreacting, which was probably true, but told me I could just take the cans down before I left for school. The next morning rolled around and it was 7 a.m. I went to grab the trash cans and the van was gone, which in a way gave me relief that I didn't go near it the night before. I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting, but it's just an unsettling encounter. So I had biked about 10 minutes to take the bus to work during the week. I had spent the weekend with my in-laws, so I didn't have my bike with me last Monday, and I had to walk after the bus got me to the closest stop. It was a 20-minute walk. Basically, it's all residential and numbered by streets. So I get off on, say, 50th Street and walk to 40th. When I first started walking, there's a black car that was on the other side of the road, driving slowly. It pulled off to the right next to somebody's driveway. I didn't think much and just kept walking. When I got to the next street though, the car is doing it again. I walked faster and trying to watch for it. It followed me most of the way there, finally turning off a side road. I didn't recognize the person in the car, which was an older male, but now I'm freaking out. I already have agoraphobia, and when I bike in the mornings, it's dark out there. Can't help but feeling that I'm being followed. Trafficking is a known thing here, and I'm female. Someone please tell me what I should do. I need to get to work, but biking and walking is the only way I can afford it right now, and I'm scared of next Monday. Update. I'm amazed by all the comments and support from y'all. Thank you. I do have pepper spray and a taser, as well as an alarm I carry around my neck that yells really loud. After some suggestions, I downloaded the Noonlight app, and that's given me the peace of mind that I needed. We have a neighborhood watch on the same street that I'm on, and I've let them, as well as the local police, know. For now, everything is okay, and I'll keep staying alert. It's sad that we have to be so aware of our surroundings, and even worry about things like this. This happened to me about a year ago. I've only ever shared the story with a couple of people. However, I thought it couldn't hurt to share it here. Big disclaimer before going forward. Don't worry, I realize I'm a huge idiot in this situation, and my choices could have put me in danger. However, I made it out alive and unharmed, and that's all that really matters, even if I was too panicked to think properly and acted like a complete idiot. Also, before I forget to mention, I'm a 21-year-old female. So it was around June 2019. I was doing a closing shift at the McDonald's I worked at in town. I live in England, originally from Scotland. We close up at 2 a.m. on weekdays and 3 a.m. on weekends. It had been a Saturday night shift, so I was finished and out the building by 3:15 roughly. When this happened, I was living about 10 to 15 minutes walk from my work in a flat that was mostly taken up by students. I didn't have money to spare to consistently get taxis, and I had been walking home at night for the past year with no incidents, so of course, I didn't think anything differently of doing it again. The majority of my walk was fine, and I was about 4 minutes away from my flat when I noticed a guy just standing near the corner that I had to turn to get home. I am wary when I see people, but usually they're drunk, or mind their own, or just ask for directions. Or it's a homeless person, as there's quite a lot in the city I live in. But at this time at night, they usually keep to themselves. This guy was dressed nice, but casual, looked around mid-20s, well-groomed, tan skin, and a really strong smelling aftershave. He was obviously a regular at a gym too, because he had a muscular figure, and he didn't seem to be drunk by the look of things, but who knows. I tried to keep my distance, but he approached me and started making really casual conversation, asking me what my name was, complimenting my accent, and asking where I was from. I stupidly engaged with him, but gave him a fake name and made it clear I wasn't up for a chat. I should have been firm with my words, but I'm way too introverted and shy to speak up. Even my boyfriend complains that I talk too quietly sometimes, and I struggle to be direct with people. Throughout the whole conversation, he was giving me an unsettling smile and would try to touch my arm or play with my hair, which I made it as clear as I possibly could that I did not approve of. Not that he was listening. He would just say something along the lines of, "But you're just so pretty." Not flattering at all when it's a man who won't take no for an answer. Anyways, this guy asked me for a hug, and even though I refused him as politely as possible, he did it anyways. I froze up for a couple seconds before I moved away, which thankfully he let me do. He was being extremely creepy at this point and tried feeling over my sides as he gave me a hug, which gave me even more alarm bells ringing in my head. I told him I had to leave, and as I was walking away, I heard, "I'll walk you home. Where do you live?" Unfortunately, I had nowhere else to go but home. Nobody else was around, and it was too early in the morning. My roommate was also back at his own house, as he went back home every weekend. I had a hold of my keys in my pocket and just hoped once I got to the building I could find a way in without this guy being able to invite himself in. I refused his walk home, but he followed me anyways, walking about 8 to 10 feet away from me as I was speeding up at this point, but caught up as I crossed the road. I don't know why I decided to go the long way to get to my building, which was an extra 2 minutes or so not that long. As I was approaching the flat, I felt a horrible sinking feeling in my chest. The door to the building closes really slow at first, before slamming shut, so I knew if I walked in, he could potentially follow me inside, and that puts me at an even greater risk. By this point, he was begging me to let him inside. He said he was extremely thirsty and wanted some water, but I told him that my roommate was sleeping, a subtle way to deter him by showing that I wasn't alone. But that didn't seem to faze him. He was trying to be touchy and just kept pleading with me to let him inside. But I kept my ground and said no as best as possible. As he was talking to me, I managed to use the fob on the door to open it, just enough to carefully slide through. However, he was right by the door and I didn't want to make him upset, so I apologized and told him no once again. Luckily, he had moved away from the door as someone wanted to get into the building. The guy asked if everything was okay when he saw me, but I stupidly said everything was fine. That did give me a chance to move away from the door and let it close once the guy walked through. I didn't even look back to the guy as I ran upstairs to my flat as fast as I could. I didn't get any sleep that night, and from that moment on, I made sure I always had money aside for a taxi. I think I walked home once more between June and October before I moved. Really scary stuff, and I'm glad I never saw him again after that. This all happened probably about a month ago, from Thursday to Monday. Night 1, Thursday. I just gotten off of work and walked a bit to get to my car. It was 10:30 p.m., as I usually got off work pretty late at night. As I was unlocking it, a Jeep turned the corner, saw me, and slammed on the brakes on the opposite side of the street. He started yelling something at me, and I was pretty scared, so I didn't say anything back, and I got into my car right after that. I was watching the Jeep in my rearview mirror, and he flipped a U-turn and sat behind my car for a few minutes. I didn't move my car, as I was scared he was going to follow me home. After a few minutes, he had driven away. I drove around taking random turns because I was freaked out. I texted my coworker, and she had seen the Jeep as well. I got into work the next morning. He was in the parking spot I was in, so we all laughed about how paranoid I was. Night 2, Friday. My coworker and I had just gotten off work again, and it was possibly around 11 p.m. She decided to drive me to my car because parking on the street where my work is located sucks, so I had to park 3 streets away. We had just crossed the street and gotten into her car, and the same Jeep whips around the corner. I told her, look who it is, and we had a laugh about it. Once I was in my car, I was driving down the street her truck was just parked on. The Jeep once again whipped around the same corner where us 2 girls were. I thought it was slightly strange, but chalked it up to being paranoid again, and I didn't think anything of it. Night 3, Monday. It was around 10:30 p.m., and us girls were still at work waiting for a few more clients to pick up their pets. I was just giving a woman her dog when the same Jeep parks in my work's parking lot. He had told me that he had been driving around the area for the past 45 minutes trying to find a parking spot. Again, the parking on the street my work is located at is atrocious, but nothing so bad that you would spend 45 minutes driving around looking for a spot. It takes about 10 at the most. I know, I've timed it. I had said, okay, you can just sit here, but my car's right there. I can move it and you can take my spot, no big deal. He looked at me dead in the eyes and said, no, I want to sit here. I got a pretty bad feeling and went back inside and let the girls know that the guy was in our parking lot. They all thought it was pretty weird and creepy, especially because I had offered him the spot. He just turned his car completely off. He didn't have his phone on that we could see or any other light source. 11:30 rolls by and we see his car turn back on. He had just been sitting there for about an hour at that time of night. We found it pretty weird. After he finally left, we made sure we saw his Jeep turn the corner and booked it to our cars. This may just be me being overdramatic, but I believe he had bad intentions for one of us girls. I've only seen that Jeep twice since these incidents, and I'm constantly looking for it. This story happened to me about 3 years back, when I used to work at a gas station very close to where I live. The event really creeped me out, so I can vividly picture everything that happened that day at work. I had went in for my shift about 6 p.m. that day. Our gas station was open 24/7, so some days I would end up working till about 1 in the morning. The first half of my shift was nothing out of the ordinary. They put me on the floor shift instead of working in the kitchen, so I was mostly just cleaning up the store. Every now and then, we would get a lot of customers at a time, so I would have to cash them out and handle the register, but that was just a normal thing. After some time, I had stocked the cooler, cleaned up some dishes, and finished up some tasks, so overall, it was a very easy day. I can remember at the time of her first arriving, I was finishing up cleaning the kitchen. We normally close the kitchen around 10:30 every night, but the person on the kitchen shift ended up doing a horrible job of cleaning up. My manager put me back there just to tidy things up and clean the machines. I was just about to take off my gloves when I saw an elderly woman with a book bag on enter the store. I normally don't stop what I'm doing to look at customers who come in, but there was something just really off about her. She was walking with this very awkward limp, and her hood was up. That alone would raise concerns, but for the first 20 seconds that she was in the store, her head was facing directly towards the ground. She made a loop around the one part of the store, and then went up to the counter. She looked up at my manager, and in almost a whisper goes, "Can I use your telephone, please?" After this, I thought maybe she was just homeless and was calling someone for a ride, so I shrugged it off. I made myself a flatbread sandwich before closing up, so I went behind the counter to eat it before I got back to work. Every now and again, I caught myself looking up at her on the phone, and I realized she had her back turned to both of us and was speaking quietly. The creepiest part was that she kept looking back at me. She would talk on the phone inaudibly, then whip her head back, stare at me for like 3 seconds, then turn around and go back to talking. This made me super uncomfortable. After she got finished using the phone, she went behind the counter of the store and just sat down. This is the first time I've ever seen someone just sit down in our store. At this point, I had finished my sandwich and went back to grab the floor scrubber because it had been a while since I cleaned up the floor. When I came out, I was directly across from her, and I could just see her staring at me. She wouldn't take her gaze off me. Everywhere I went throughout the store, I just felt her eyes peeled on the back of my head. I stopped the scrubber for a moment and decided I should stock some drinking cups because one of the slots was completely empty. I looked back at her and she was still looking at me, but this time she got up and went back to the counter again. She looked up yet again at my manager and asked if she could use the phone. The eerie part was that she kept doing the same thing, where she would talk on the phone, look back at me, turn around and continue talking. She didn't even grab her stuff or anything. She just had her hood on and kept awkwardly staring. I obviously had to continue working my job, but I got really worried about who she was talking to on the phone and why she wouldn't stop looking at me while she was talking to them. I got back on the scrubber and she went back into the corner of the store to sit down. I was making my way up the aisle towards her when I got a really good look at what she looked like. Her stare gave me the chills. She had really big eyes and they looked very dark. They might have been very dark brown, but to me they appeared almost black. She still had her hood up and she was just sitting there staring at me. Now, it's normal for a person to look at someone when they're coming up to you, but I was literally 10 feet away and she was staring directly at me for 5 seconds. If you've ever seen the movie Drag Me to Hell, she looked like the old woman from that movie. I quickly looked down at the floor but continued scrubbing past her. After what seemed like forever, I finished a small bit of floor in the area and made my way to the back of the store. I was halfway there when I heard a rustling of the book bag and realized that she grabbed her stuff and walked out. She did it so quickly it startled me. As she walked out, I looked at the window and realized that there was no car there to pick her up. Whoever she was talking to on the phone obviously was not her ride. She was just walking all by herself on the road. I recently got a job at a hotel downtown from where I live. I had never worked in the hotel industry before, so I had no idea what to expect. The time between applying for the job and being hired was less than 24 hours, which made me nervous. But I had been looking for several months and couldn't find anything, so I thought I'll take the chance. The hotel is about 150 years old, and has plenty of character. Behind the front desk are places where the wallpaper has torn away, revealing the psychedelic wallpaper from what I could only guess to be the 1970s. We're talking bright pink, neon green, hookah-induced vision-type wallpaper. The walls in the upper floors are painted bright yellow and orange, and the hallways are narrow and even give off that shining kind of feel to it. But I'll elaborate on that later. My manager was a young Chinese man in his mid-20s, only 5 years older than me. The man who owns the building is also Chinese, and literally a walking stereotype. The owner is friendly and kind to his employees, but he's also rich enough that he doesn't really care if the hotel is up to par. I learned recently that he also owns one of the more run-down shopping centers downtown, so this might explain the less than 5-star quality of the hotel. Probably about 3.5 stars, in my opinion. Some people describe it as quaint, unique, full of character, while others describe it as outdated or disappointing. As a history enthusiast, I would agree that this place is full of character, but I think the owner should be a little more concerned about keeping the place clean. There are lots of problems in this hotel, including mice, broken toilets, falling ceiling tiles, leaks, and other maintenance nightmares. The fancier rooms on the top floors have real fireplaces in them, so that also adds risk of fires at the hands of careless guests. Mice are a common problem, and thankfully the guests don't have to see any of the dusty traps filled with dead rodents in the basement. But by far, the most interesting aspect of the hotel is that it's supposed to be haunted. There are 2 ghosts that have been reported in the building, as well as the adjoining pub next door. Back when the hotel was first built, it had a reputation of being a complete dive. A lady, now named Lady Churchill, died in the hotel, and her spirit lingers in the haunted room 49. Guests will occasionally smell her perfume or see her face in the mirror. One of the most frightening stories includes someone opening the door only to have Lady Churchill fly at them in fury. On my first day, when my boss toured me around the hotel, he pointed out the haunted room to me. Lady Churchill had also been spotted at the fireplace in the pub, arguing with her boyfriend, the other resident ghost, Brady. Brady was stabbed to death in the basement stairwell. The stairwell is not in use anymore and leads directly from the street into the basement. Instead, it's used to store extra chairs and miscellaneous items. The light is never turned on, which adds more of a creepy factor. My shift is a day shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Every morning when I come in, I have to check the entire hotel by myself in search of homeless people sleeping in the back stairwell or trying to get through the basement. I'm not an intimidating person. I'm a short female, not physically fit, and too friendly for my own good. If I did find someone hiding in the hotel, what was I supposed to do about it? I'm not sure what creeps me out more, the fact that I'm going to look around for people that shouldn't be there, or the idea that I have to walk around in the dark, silent areas known to be haunted, all by myself. My sweep of the hotel includes all 4 floors and guest rooms, the kitchen, the back stairwell, and the basement stairwell, as well as the basement. To give you some context, the back stairwell serves as a fire escape connecting all the floors together. It goes straight down to the street level. It's always cold and echoey in there, and as I said before, full of dead mice. When I was first told about the haunted stairwell, I mistakenly thought that they meant the fire escape stairs, as they go down to the basement level. The 4 floors for the guest rooms, in all their overlook hotel glory, are shaped like a square horseshoe, which means more enough blind corners. Lady Churchill haunted the room at the end of the hall, around one of these blind corners, and yes, I do think about it every time I search the hotel. There's an elevator and an interior stairway, the one guests are supposed to use. Behind the elevator is an old connecting hallway that basically serves no purpose anymore. In the past, it may have been useful, but now it just serves as a secret passageway that goes behind the elevator and comes out the other end of the horseshoe. This hallway especially needs to be searched for homeless people, drunks, or people having sex. The basement is by far the creepiest part of the hotel. To get there, you either take the elevator or go through the pub and down the stairs. I prefer to go through the pub because there are some fantastic black and white photos of when the hotel was first built, and I love to look at them. It was almost the best place to see the age of the brick foundation. Anyway, the basement is used for storing beer kegs, firewood, plant potters, housekeeping items, and maintenance tools, among other things. It was usually deserted. Now that I know the dark, unused basement stairway is not where Brady's spirit is supposed to be, I think I try to spend even less time down there. This week is my second week of work, and my boss had put me on the afternoon-evening shift, just so I can get a sense of what it's like in case I have to cover someone in the future. Yesterday was my first late shift, and in that time I learned a whole bunch of things that I didn't know from the lady I worked with. This woman, let's call her Peggy, has been at the hotel for 14 years. She has seen all there is to see, and is well known for her stories. I've listened to some of the stories, and honestly, part of me thinks she's full of shit, but the other part is going to cautiously believe her on the off chance that it's true. Here are some things I learned about the hotel in the span of one shift. The man I'm replacing was not actually fired for chronic lateness, as my boss had told me, but instead for sexual harassment. The head of housekeeping, a man I get along very well with, is a friend of his. 2. The day before, Peggy caught a drug addict rooting around in the private back office after hours. We looked over the security footage and he was definitely searching for something. We now keep the office doors locked. 3. There were 2 guests several years back who stayed at the hotel, and the next day they robbed a jewelry store downtown and fled back to the hotel with everything they had stolen. There was a massive police standoff on the roof, SWAT teams and all. There's a news article about it online, otherwise I would have not believed it. 4. The bedrock of the hotel can be found in the boiler room. There is a slight gap that has been filled in on the top right corner that connects directly to the street. One time Peggy came down there to the boiler room to find a man halfway through the gap head first, trying to get in because he wanted to know what was down there. That image terrifies me. In that span of one night shift, an alarm bell went off in the basement. The police showed up at the pub, and a guest verbally abused the day staff over a non-existent shuttle to the hospital. No, not an ambulance, a shuttle. Taking the bus was beneath them, I suppose. And at my bus stop after my shift, a man was shooting up in public. My city has a drug epidemic going on right now. My bus took about a half hour to arrive, and when I got off at my stop, it was as foggy as Silent Hill. I thought as if I should be looking around for Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. It is October after all. That's one night shift down. I have another one tonight, and one more the day after. If anything interesting happens, I'll keep you folks updated. I mostly wanted to get this off my chest. So this is my first post here, and I figured I'll share the most recent thing that happened to me. I just moved not too long ago to a house on the other side of the city. I was barely even settled in when this happened. One of the first things I took care of was to get my home security up and running. I am a very cautious person because of things that have happened in the past, and I don't feel comfortable without cameras and motion detectors. I was on my second day in the house, as in actually living here, with everything set up. I was at my desk working on my newest Unreal Engine project when I glanced at the monitors for my cameras, which showed a man standing in the street in front of my house. He was by my mailbox, and I watched for a minute as he reached towards my box, then stopped like he was hesitating, and looked up at my house. I found it odd and decided to see what was going on. I wasn't too concerned as I own a .45 and had it with me. By the time I got out there, which wasn't very long, the guy was gone. He already crossed the street to the next block and was walking pretty quickly. I didn't think much of it. I really figured he just had the wrong house or something simple like that. I checked the mailbox because he was right there and it was still empty. I very briefly entertained the notion that he had placed something inside, maybe something grisly or frightening, but that was probably a result of reading too much Stephen King. It didn't take long for me to forget about the incident entirely and bury myself into my computer. Hours passed, and before I knew it, midnight had come and gone. I decided that it was time to go and relax, and went to lay on the couch and watch some TV. About 20 minutes later, I started hearing noises from outside. I pulled up my phone and checked my cameras, but there seemed to be nothing going on outside, and the motion detectors hadn't triggered, so I went back to my show. I looked up just a little later to see a man looking through my window, staring right at me. I yelled, "What the fuck?" and jumped off the couch, grabbing my .45 off the table. He wasn't at the window anymore, so I went outside to the side of my house and didn't see him. I checked my entire property, but the man was gone. The camera showed that he had ran into the backyard and hopped the fence to the alley. He was pretty fast about it too. I realized it was the man from earlier and wondered what the hell was going on. I debated filing a police report, but decided not to. I haven't had a wonderful experience in the past with law enforcement, and tend to avoid that if at all possible. I did note at the time that none of my motion sensors had been triggered when this happened, and figured that they were probably not set up right. I didn't want to check them as it was early in the morning and dark, so I planned to do it later in that day. I ended up dozing off on the couch and woke up to the motion sensor alarm going off. I'm not a heavy sleeper and it didn't take me long to respond. All in all, it was probably a few seconds before I got outside. It was, of course, this man again. He's running down the street in the same direction as the first time. I found something quite bothersome on the footage. The man hadn't triggered the motion alarm. He had been looking in my window for several minutes already by the time the alarm went off, apparently watching me sleep. The alarm was triggered on the other side of my house by the neighbor's dog of all things. To this day, I don't have answers. A neighbor of mine saw the footage and thought it was the son of the house's former resident, who was known to be pretty unstable and disturbed. I did file a police report, and of course, nothing came of it. They didn't waste too much time and energy looking into it. I have no idea how he avoided triggering the motion sensors, or what he wanted from me. I do keep my windows closed and curtains drawn now. Never know who's watching. I was staying over at my grandma's house with two of my sisters for a few days, while my grandma was visiting a friend. They were discharged from the hospital and needed someone to take care of her, so my grandma went to help. She had a good security system, with lights on the sides of the house that sense movement. She has a lot of cats, but they've never set the lights off before. I was in the kids' room. My oldest sister was in my grandmother's room, right across the hall from mine, and my sister Haley was in the room right next to hers. I have a pretty big thing about making sure all doors and curtains are shut. I can't sleep without knowing that I've checked them at least twice. When my sisters went to bed around 10 p.m., I stayed up until about 1 in the morning, just drawing. I finally decided to go to bed at that time, so I was just about to take my contacts out when I decided to check the doors and curtains again. I got out of bed and made my way to the front door. I checked it and moved on to the kitchen, where the back door was, and did the same. There was one more door that led outside, and that was in the laundry room. I had just walked in when I looked across the room to see a window. The security light was on, which meant that someone tripped it. I didn't even make it into the room when I heard the doorknob jiggling. I don't mean like they were trying the door and then realized it was locked. I mean, whoever was on the other side was trying their damnedest to get in. I thought the doorknob was gonna give in. My heart dropped. I knew it wasn't my sisters. I saw them through the open door sleeping, and there's no need for them to be out at 1 a.m. I couldn't move. I was so scared. I could clearly hear whoever was on the other side trying to get in. I didn't have my phone with me, and I couldn't call my sisters because I didn't know if the person on the other side would hear me. The thought did cross my mind to look, but they would have seen me, and I don't know what would have happened if they did. Eventually, the rattling stopped and I ran back to my room, where my knife was. I stayed up for hours listening to the house and for whoever was trying to get in. The next day, I called my dad, and he told me I shouldn't tell any of the others. It would freak my grandma out, and my sisters wouldn't have wanted to stay. I never did tell them what happened. To this day, I have no idea who was at the door. Whoever it was, I know their intentions were not good. If somebody really needed help, why would they go to the back door and not the front? This happened when I was around 6 years old. When I was little, I would get scared to sleep in my bedroom at night, and I wasn't a big fan of the dark. I usually ended up sleeping in the living room. My mom's bedroom door was right off it, just in case I needed her. My dad was overseas at the time, so it was just me and my mom in the house. She was also pregnant with my little sister at the time. I would say it was around 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the morning. I woke up out of a dead sleep. It took me a little bit to finally come to and sit up. As I was looking around the room, I looked at the front door. We had a storm door, and then an old wood door with like 4 to 6 of those glass little windows. When I looked over the door, there was someone standing on the porch, looking through the glass. Their hands cuffed around their face, trying to block out the light from the porch so they could see in the house. I hurried up and laid back down, pulling the covers over my face, like he couldn't see me right in front of him. I was 6. I was scared. I felt like I was frozen. I wanted to yell for my mom, but I didn't want the guy to hear me. I probably lay there for 5 minutes, then looked up again. He was gone. I got up and ran to my mom's room, waking her up and telling her that someone was on the front porch. It didn't take much for her to believe, as we had got some random calls from people telling us that they were going to break into our house and that they knew that my dad was gone. She grabbed her phone and called the police. They all knew what was going on, considering we lived in a small town and knew everyone here. It felt like it only took 2 seconds for them to get to my house. They checked the yard and the building in the back. They went through the alleyway and the blocks around us. They didn't find anyone, so finally we moved in with my grandparents until my dad came back. I'm 24 now, and I moved back to my hometown where this all took place. Sometimes I still think about waking up and seeing someone looking into my house. But creepy old man looking through my door at night. I'm glad we never met again, and I hope we never do. Over the past few years living in this house, many strange things have happened. Mostly noises, loud banging, or knocks on the window. The manhole cover in the ceiling being opened up constantly, even when there had been no storms. Stuff like that. I'm a bit antisocial, and I don't necessarily answer the door if I'm not expecting anyone. We never have unexpected visitors, and our neighbor has our mobile number, so a knock on the door is usually a door-to-door salesman or a religious nut. One day, I heard knocking on the door in the morning. I was working, and my kids were still asleep. I peeked out the window, and there was an old man there, and he was standing awkwardly in the entranceway. I decided he didn't look like a psychopath, nor did he look like he was going to give me a Jesus pamphlet, so I decided to answer the door and see what he wanted. He apologized for knocking because he had noticed my kids were asleep in their room through the side window. Then he asked me if he could pick some of the fruit from the vines in our front yard. I thought it was a super weird request, but didn't really care, so I said sure thing. I went into the room to check on the kids instinctively, and when I came back out of the room, he was gone. I never noticed a car. Not a big deal, I know, but before this happened, another day when I checked on my kids, also early in the morning, I had just woken up and again was the only person awake. I peeked out the window from my kid's room, and through the window I saw a tall, lanky, very old man at the door. I generally have no idea if it was the same man, because I have pretty bad face blindness, and this was months earlier. I held my breath and watched him through the window. He didn't knock, nor did he seem like he was planning to knock. He instead was sort of taking side steps and looking at our flower bed, which was full of weeds. He barely looked towards the front door at all, and just kind of calmly walked around in a very small area, nowhere near our fruit vine by the way, just near our front door. Because he hadn't knocked, I was super confused. I watched it for a few minutes before I decided to confront him and ask him what the fuck. My kid's room is right next to the front door. It's maybe 7 feet from it. I walked the 3 or so steps from my kid's door to the front door and swung it open. No one was there. We have bay-type windows showing the side of the house and the backyard, so I could instantly see he wasn't in the backyard or the side of the house. I walked out the front, down the short path onto the driveway, and then onto the road, consistently looking back to make sure no one snuck in the front door. No cars were driving, no neighbors had anyone at their door. I even checked the other side of the house. The dude had literally vanished into thin air. No idea what this is all about, but I thought I would share my story. Hey guys, this is my first post here. I definitely have other encounters, but this just happened a few hours ago, and I knew I had to post it. So I'm currently at college in Boston, and have an apartment on the North End with my buddy, both 21-year-old males. My girlfriend came up for the weekend to visit, and we were doing our normal weekend things, drinking and just hanging out. My roommate convinced us to watch The Green Inferno because it had just made its way to Netflix, and I had been meaning to watch it. Horribly fucked up movie, but pretty good if you like gruesome horror, but also don't mind bad acting. 3/4 through the movie, I kept hearing banging noises coming from what sounded like inside our building. At first, I ignored it, thinking I was just hearing things, or it was noise from our busy main street that our apartment building is on. But after a few times, I thought I heard a girl scream. I paused the movie and asked my roommate and my girlfriend if they heard it, and they both did, but we shrugged it off as random kids getting drunk. I heard it twice more, and it wasn't sitting right with me, so I paused it and said to my roommate, "Let's take a walk down the stairs and check the halls." We left our place on the top floor and headed towards the stairs where we saw a man who looked to be in his mid to late 20s. He was sitting on the stairs outside an apartment and he looked like he was a mess. We asked him if this was his place, and he kind of said yes, but not definitively, and he sounded a bit drunk. We had no reason not to believe him, so we went back to our room. However, right when we got back, I remembered that the only people that lived in that unit were 2 or 3 girls, and my roommate agreed. We decided to head back out there, and at this point, my girlfriend was freaked out. We approached him again and asked, "Are you sure this is your place?" He stood up and said yeah, and then proceeded to aggressively bang on the door multiple times. When he stood up, I immediately noticed poop stains on his white jeans and pointed it out to my roommate. We are both in shape and realized right away if anything happened, we could easily take this guy. At this point, we both said that we think he should leave to this guy because clearly that wasn't his place and he was not at all there. I mean, the dude shit himself. He looked at us, then back at the door, where he tried 5 different keys to unlock it. Obviously, none of them worked, so we firmly told him to leave the building. The whole time, he didn't really argue with us, and never gave us firm answers, further proving our point that he messed up and didn't belong here. At this point, something must have clicked in his head, so he started heading down the stairs with us, closely in tow, making sure that he left while plugging our noses and gagging on the stench of his poop pants. When we were inside of the landing, at the base of the stairs, the sight we saw made our stomachs drop. We saw a phone with earbuds on the top shelf that sits there, a hoodie strewn across the floor, with a mask a few feet away, a satchel-looking bag even further away, and a package that I'd seen in the lobby earlier. As soon as I saw this, I thought the absolute worst, as it looked like a struggle had taken place. I immediately asked him in an aggressive tone, "What the fuck did you do?" And I could tell he was scared now. He refused to answer me and tried to bang and open an apartment door on the first floor, claiming that that was his place. He then went to collect his things from the floor, and just to be sure, I made him unlock his iPhone right in front of me to prove that it was his. It was a Touch ID, and he opened it. We did not like the way he was acting, so we kept insisting that he should leave, as he formed answers back that were barely English. After this, he proceeded to walk towards the back of our building in a rather brisk pace. There's a tighter staircase at the back which leads to all floors, as well as an alley out back of our building. This is probably the strangest part, as very few people know about this exit to our building, but he headed there with speed and confidence. My roommate followed close behind to make sure he left and the back door shut firmly, as once it's shut you can't open it from outside, and I was far back gagging on the stench. The alley behind our building goes behind a restaurant that connects with a dirt parking lot that is accessible to the main street in the north end that our building faces. After this, we went out the front door together and walked around to the back door to make sure that this man was completely gone. We slipped a note under the door of the girls saying that we saw the man and made him leave, and to come knock or text us if they needed anything, as we wanted to make sure they were okay. Luckily, this man left without any problem occurring between him, my roommate, and I, as that would have definitely ended in an ugly manner. We knew the girls lived there, and this man was giving off terrible creepy and distraught vibes. We aren't oblivious and knew that there was a strong chance that this man had ill intentions with these girls, so we felt like we needed to do something. So anyway, creepy man who terrorized girls down the hall, let's not meet again. If we do, it won't end well. Also, you might want to pick up some adult diapers. Update: the girl who lives in the apartment was luckily not home when this all went down. She ended up texting us, so we explained what happened, and she was obviously freaked out. She called the landlord, who called us to get our side of the story, and she believes it had been an old tenant who was subletting over the summer that constantly got locked out. He would come back drunk and bang on his door, and one time actually broke it down. It's hard for me to think that it was the same guy, as he didn't start banging on the door until we mentioned that a girl lived there. Also, this apartment was a floor above and a different spot than the one that the old tenant was in. While on my way to work at the apartment complex, I saw something unnerving. Us employees typically use the back door with a keypad to get in the leasing office. So I was on my usual walk along the sidewalk that eventually brought me to face the bedroom windows of a few apartments. My gaze was aimed upwards towards the windows as I came around the bend to the back door, and I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it was a towel that someone draped on the door, but as I walked closer, I realized I was wrong. It was a person standing in the window with a sheet over their head. They were staring at me. A chill ran down my spine, and I realized how out of place this was. The keypad was directly across from the window, so I hurried up and pushed the code and let myself into the office. Once inside, I looked out the glass panel of the door to find out they had gone. I don't know if they had ill intentions or if they were just trying to scare me, but it's the strangest occurrence I've ever experienced. The story takes place the night before Halloween. I don't remember my exact age, but I'm sure I was in middle school, either 6th or 7th grade, so I couldn't have been older than 12. To provide some details to the story, I didn't weigh more than 100 pounds until I reached high school. I was always very skinny, flat from just about every angle. Wasn't particularly tall or short for a girl. I was overall pretty low energy, but the holiday that always had my excitement through the roof was Halloween. I was, and at 22 years old, still am, huge on costumes. That night, my mother drove my sister and I to this mini strip mall where a discount clothing store had just opened, maybe 3 months prior. The reason why I call it a mini strip mall is because the only other two open businesses on the strip were Sally's Beauty Store and Marshall's. It was a last minute trip, and it was easily around 8:30 or 9 p.m. So Sally's was closed, and both Marshall's and the clothing store we were going into were going to close within the hour. That being said, the clothing store was surprisingly massive once you got inside, and for Halloween they decorated the place from wall to wall with really cool decorations and costumes. It was very easy to get separated from your group in a place this big. It had many tall rows and was nearly impossible to see over. Shortly after my family and I had entered the store, one of the workers in the dressing room section puts on a skeleton mask and jumps out from behind the rack of clothes, frankly scaring the shit out of me, and me only. My mom and sister, of course, have a great laugh and separate from me, go shopping on their own. I know it was in good humor, so I go looking for a costume of my own. I had a serious addiction to my MP3 player during this time and had my headphones in while browsing, but kept getting the chills on the back of my neck because it felt like I was being watched or followed. At one point, I took one of my headphones out and turned the volume down on my music, and noticed whenever I got a feeling that a person was watching me coming closer, I'd hear the creepiest whistling noise. There were a few other families in the store shopping, so I told myself I was just being paranoid, but went to go find my family anyway. They tell me that they're gonna go a few doors down to Marshall's to shop before they close, and that I was welcome to keep costume searching at the store and to come find them when I was done. My mom gave me $20 and she and my sister left while I continued shopping. The feeling that I was still being watched or followed never left, and I eventually started looking under the clothing racks as I walked and saw a dirty pair of black sneakers on the other side of me more than once. However, I never saw the person's face. At this point, I knew I wasn't finding a costume there and was starting to leave the store to walk to Marshall's to find my family. I distinctly remember hearing the footsteps not far behind me as I was leaving, even weaving through different aisles like I was. My heart starts beating fast at this point because I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. I ran track in middle school, so I was able to pick up my pace smoothly without losing my breath. The footsteps behind me did not falter. It wasn't until I was out the store that I finally turned around and looked to see who was following me, and I remember my heart freezing when I saw him. It was a white male, probably no more than 35, dressed in all black with his hoodie up, just staring straight at me. He didn't have any bags, so he clearly wasn't shopping there, and while I'm staring at him, making eye contact, he doesn't stop following me. In fact, it looked like he was even smirking. Looking back on this, I want to hit myself for not screaming for help then and there, but sheer terror just locked my vocal cords. I immediately turned back around and broke out into a sprint. The Marshalls was several doors down and a good running distance from the original clothing store. But I'm not slowing down at all because I can hear the guy running behind me and how hard he's breathing to keep up with me. This guy was determined. I remember making whimpers when I realized he was gaining on me and was a lot faster than I was expecting. I was terrified that he would snatch me in this dark, mostly empty strip mall, and that I would never be able to get to my family in time, and that no one would question it, probably write it off as a Halloween prank they'd seen. Last minute burst of strength got me through the Marshall's automatic doors, but to my literal horror, the guy runs after me in the store. We're both still going full speed. My brain hasn't stopped to think of anything besides run at this point. To actually scream and notify the other person in the store that they were not witnessing a prank and that I was in serious danger. Luckily, I was as teeny as I was and quick on my feet because I last minute jumped between two revolving stands with phone cases and headphones and knew he wouldn't be able to jump through because of his size. He literally shoves one arm through the gap and lunges at me, trying to grab the back of my shirt. But luckily, he makes a lot of noise doing so, and more people in the store look over. I haven't stopped running at this point, and I have no plans to, and by the time I find my mom, I'm babbling and sweating and crying. The last thing I see was this man making a quick retreat from the store. To this day, my mom and sister still think I'm over-exaggerating this story. They both still firmly think that it was a prank being played by a man working at the store in a skeleton mask. And I hate that it even happened because it really discredited my story. The man working at the store with the skeleton mask was a teenage boy with a bright red uniform on. The man that stalked me and almost successfully kidnapped me was a grown man who had the most terrifying atmosphere I've ever been around. There are many things I wish I'd done differently, but to this day I thank my lucky stars that I was small enough and quick enough to evade this man. I didn't have my cell phone that day either. I had gotten into some sort of trouble, so if I had been taken, there would have been virtually no way to find me. Just writing this gives me chills, but because of what happened, I'm extremely protective around all my young girl cousins when we're out in public and someone stares at them just a little too long. This story is tame compared to most on here, but at the time it terrified me. For context, I'm 21 now. When I was 12, my family and I had just moved from the Midwest to a town in South Georgia. I was just a 4'6", 85-pound, teeny homeschooled girl that has always grown up in suburbia and now was thrusted into a small town with rampant crime and very heavy gang activity. My dad was deployed to Iraq at this time, so on Halloween night there was no adults to take me and my brothers trick-or-treating because my mom was staying at the house to hand out candy. My older brother decided to stay home because he was 14 and too old to trick-or-treat. Well, growing up in a most organic, sugar-free household, I sure as hell wasn't going to let that stop me from getting my annual sugar binge, and I set out with my 8-year-old brother to trick-or-treat in our neighborhood. It was a very small neighborhood, well lit by streetlights and full of people walking around, so my mom was fine with us going and just told us to be back soon. Well, we started to make our rounds. I was dressed as a chef and my brother was wearing a fluffy lion costume, like the one from the Wizard of Oz. We went down our street and the one next to it and turned to walk down a way that would take us in a circle back to our house. Something felt off all of a sudden. The streetlights were all out on this street, and I started feeling really uneasy. It was so still and quiet, and none of the houses had their porch lights on, and there were no people trick-or-treating, which was strange because it was only about 8:30 p.m. I keep walking tentatively, my brother just bouncing along, happy besides me with his bag of candy. Suddenly, in the dark, I am able to make out a tall figure, about 15 feet down the street, sitting in one of those metal cubes that holds the electric shit that all neighborhoods seem to have. He was sitting extremely still, not looking at us, but staring straight ahead of him, like he was trying not to move. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled up and clenched tight around his face. Well, my big sister instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my brother's hand, slowed down my steps, and tried softly to say, "John, slowly turn around and start walking the other way, but don't say anything." Being the loud kid he has been, he said, "What?" in a piercing loud baby voice. I said, "Turn around," through clenched teeth, then pulled him by his hand and started to walk back in the direction we came from as casually as I could. All of a sudden, the figure jumps up and starts sprinting after us, yelling angrily. I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but it was something to the effects of, "You little shits, get back here." We ran for our lives, and I still don't know how we ran so fast. My heart was racing and my little brother was lagging behind. I could still see and hear the man running after us. We booked it around the corner to the first house we saw and burst into the garage where there was a nice old man handing out candy. We clearly startled him. He looked like a nice old grandpa, and I started blurting out what just happened loudly and manically, and he calmed me and my little brother down and offered to walk us back to our house. Before we left, two kids who were sitting in the garage with him walked over to us. They were about our age, and I assumed they were his grandchildren. They handed us a pillowcase full of candy and told us to take them because they already had a lot and we needed it more than them because we weren't going to go trick-or-treating anymore. To this day, it was one of the more striking and generous, unprovoked acts of kindness by children that I have ever experienced. I said thank you, and the friendly grandpa walked us to our home and told our mom what happened. She thanked him profusely and gave him a hug, and we went inside to eat candy safe and sound. I'm really grateful for the old man and his family. This story took place in 2010 in a town I used to live in. It was Halloween, and since I lived in Colorado, it was very cold and snowing early that week. I was 9 at the time, so naturally my mom made me wear bright pink sweats under my butterfly dress. Soon, we began walking the streets alongside my mom and my best friend. To get a better description of our surroundings, we lived in a circle with 2 no-exit streets in the middle. Soon after we started walking, we passed this tall man. He was wearing a white t-shirt and had no hair. I also noticed he had no children with him and was just walking alone. We made eye contact and I was very uncomfortable, but soon forgot about it. About a week later, I'm sitting in my room when my mom came to look out the window saying that there were police all over. I went to look out myself and saw a SWAT car pull up and men with heavy guns walking down the street. My dad went outside to ask someone what was going on. They explained that someone they were looking for was in one of the connecting streets and to stay inside. I was extremely scared, but eventually fell asleep, considering it was a school night. When I was asleep, my parents heard loud bangs and shouting through a megaphone for the rest of the night. Soon after, my mom called me into her room to show me the newspaper article about that night. The first thing I recognized was the mugshot of the bald man in the white t-shirt. So this happened about 10 years ago when I was in high school. My friends and I went to a local corn maze like we did every fall. It was probably a week before Halloween. The place we went to had a large regular corn maze and a smaller one that was a haunted house version. I love scary movies, but I've never been able to handle haunted houses. For that reason, me and my friends only bought tickets for the regular corn maze. I don't remember how long we had been walking around and trying to find the exit, but all of a sudden we turned the corner and there's this man, maybe in his 20s, laying on the ground curled up in the fetal position. We slowly approached and my friend Sarah called out and asked if he was okay. He then jumped up super fast. When he did, we were able to see his face. It was painted all white with black circles around the eyes and a black outline around the mouth like a creepy clown. He then started chasing us. I lost it. I turned around screaming and honestly peed my pants a little. This wasn't the haunted maze. People weren't supposed to jump out at you. We started screaming and running through the maze to get away. He only chased us for a minute before he disappeared. I don't know if he turned around or we just lost him. We found the exit, went to the ticket counter and told them. They said it was definitely not one of their actors and that they would go and check it out. And that's the end of my story. We just left. I don't think I realized then how creepy the situation was. An adult with his face painted chasing young girls in a corn maze that you can easily get lost in. I feel like anything could have happened, and we're lucky it didn't. This happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. We lived in a small town where nothing ever happens, and we thought it would be the same that night. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had lots of fun. At around 8 p.m., we realized we had to head home, but on the way back we dropped by our teacher's house. She wasn't home and the street didn't have many street lights. To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off. My friend and I were slightly spooked and disappointed by the lack of candy. We wanted to get out of the street as soon as possible. That's when a man emerged from under one of the few street lights. It was a police officer. None of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He startled us, but seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to an inconspicuous bungalow. He said an older man living in his house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone had called the police, but when he arrived, no one was answering the door. He kept telling us that his police car and partner were just around the block. We looked around but couldn't see them. I was a paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom had watched a lot of crime shows, and she would always tell me tidbits of lessons. One of these was a story about fake cops. Although I didn't remember the details, I remembered people could pretend to be cops to gain trust. Throughout the whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of badge, police car, and partner did not feel right. I was also conflicted because he was smiling and seemed like he just wanted to help. That was until we heard a strange request. He said he needed to speak to the potential predator and needed our help. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed that he would hide in the bushes next to the front door. He'd wait for the guy to invite us in, jump out, and catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way I did. We both fell silent, but one of us managed to ask if we could discuss. The cop said yes, but told us we had limited time. The street was silent, and he could hear everything. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing that he would hear us and escalate the situation. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us we had to decide quickly. Around that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said he'll be right back and not to go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop, him playing a prank on us, or him being a real cop, but we misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove us to the house and in the area around the house. No cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I could say I regret not calling the police. At the time, my friend and I were convinced that we misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it was not alarming. I wonder what his motives were, but it will unfortunately remain unsolved. When I was little, like 8 or 9, I was walking ahead of my mom and aunt with my cousin on Halloween. My cousin and I knocked on the door of a house that looked kind of run down, but not out of the ordinary. We lived in a pretty poor part of the city. An old lady answered. She looked like a stereotypical creepy lady, dirty hair, kind of hunched over and really skinny, with long fingernails and a huge smile. Once again, due to the people in this part of town, like junkies, it doesn't look too off-putting. Without hesitation, she looked around and started trying to get me and my cousin to go inside her house. She kept saying, "The candy bowl's too big to carry, so you have to come in and get it," over and over again. My cousin and I weren't stupid and started getting ready to walk away, until we heard the toilet flush and a door opening before an old man, most likely her husband, came out and grabbed the candy bowl from the counter and gave us a couple pieces of candy, before telling his wife, "No, they are trick-or-treaters," and then closed the door and immediately turned off the porch light. Due to other similar scenarios that we had heard from classmates and my personal experience, it didn't click with me that I could have been in danger, since I lived in this area for my whole life, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for sketchy people to act up around this neighborhood. After moving from there a few years later, I started realizing that stuff like this wasn't normal. I just left a Halloween party and was dressed as Beetlejuice. An Uber dropped me off by my house, and I started to wander around looking for a food truck. I had seen them out before and didn't really feel nervous walking around as a woman at night by myself because it's not exactly an abandoned area or known for its crime. I figured I'd find something within a few minutes and be on my way home. Plus, I only had 1 or 2 drinks, nothing to really take my level of alertness down. The problem occurred when I decided to walk between avenues. I wasn't having any luck on Melrose, so I decided to walk north down a residential block to get to another avenue where I'd have more luck. I remember I really wanted to listen to music, so first mistake. I was looking down at my phone, queuing up a song to play out loud without any headphones while I walked. I didn't realize a man was running behind me at full speed until he was almost on top of me. 2 things happened at once. I realized that there was a person literally sprinting at me, and right as I stepped out of the way, he tripped over some fallen palm leaves that weren't visible in the darkness. He stumbled but did not fall, and I said something like, "Are you okay?" But he didn't reply. He just kept running at full speed until he reached the corner and turned left, out of my sight. I immediately felt that what had just happened was very, very sinister. Looking around, there was no one behind him or in front of him. No friends or someone who dared him to pull a prank, and I got a good enough look at his clothes to know that he wasn't in running gear. Even if he had been, why would he be out at 1 a.m., alone, running full speed? He legitimately would have slammed right into me if I hadn't stepped out of the way at the last second. I could only help but to think something terrible would have happened to me if I hadn't hurt his feet or those fronds hadn't have tripped him. What do you guys think? When I was a kid, about 10, I was allowed to go trick-or-treating alone around the neighborhood with 2 friends both my age. I dressed as a witch or something of that nature. Long time ago, so I don't quite remember. Anyway, we got to the house where this man was probably in his mid-40s. He answered the door and says, "The candy's inside, and we can step inside to get it." Being up to date on stranger danger lectures, we politely declined and offered to wait outside. He looked annoyed but didn't press it, and said to wait there and shut the door. Maybe 30 seconds pass and he flings the door open. There's a flash as he takes a picture of us and slams the door in our face. We run down the main street and stood there for a second, wondering what just happened, but then decided to keep trick-or-treating. Luckily nothing happened, but it scared the shit out of us. I went to Walmart today with 2 of my friends. I made a return, then we went back to see the Halloween decor. As we go, we see this man, a good-looking man in a nice suit. He looks like he really doesn't belong in Walmart. He looks at me, stops for a second in the middle of the walk path, then keeps walking and takes out his phone. Now I thought maybe he knew me, you know, like I reminded him of someone, or maybe he found me attractive. I didn't think anything of it till I was in the electronics section, and I was by myself for a moment. My friend had gone to another section. I was looking at earphones, and I happened to look up for a second, and he was standing there. He was acting like he was looking for something, then looking at me. He smiled at me, and our eyes met, and he started walking towards me, but kept looking around. A very weird feeling came over me. I quickly turned and went out to find my friends. I moved quickly and found them in the dog food section. I quickly told them, and they said that I was probably just paranoid, but that we would stay together just in case. I nodded, but the feeling never went away. I was on edge for the rest of the trip. I kept seeing him. I passed him at least 4 more times throughout our trip, and then nothing. My friends felt like he was definitely following us around, and we went to go check out. When we were walking to my friend's car, and he went into a black Escalade. We put all our bags in the car quickly, put the cart away, and hopped in the car. We waited to make sure he was gone. We were so freaked out. We didn't go to our apartment for a couple hours, but went to Red Robin in case he was going to follow us home. We made it back, and we are never going to Walmart again. I haven't been this creeped out in forever. I hope to never see this man again. So I was literally just browsing here, and a certain post made me remember this. Also, not as creepy as other stories, but still creepy to me. So this was like 10 or 11 years ago. I'm not sure. All I remember that it was Halloween, and I was around 5 or 6 years old. Also, since this was a long time ago, some details may not be exactly the same. So I was doing the typical Halloween stuff. Was in a costume and knocking on doors. I get to the sketchy house, and my dumbass thought it was decorated that way. So I went to knock. Some man answers the door, and I ask for candy. All from what I remember, this dude was kind of old. He said he didn't bring the candy, but it was inside, so he told me to come inside with him to go get it. Luckily, my older brother wasn't as much of a dumbass as me. He hurried up to me and gave the excuse that my parents were calling us. And before you ask, my parents were somewhere else in the street, but at the time we were out of their view. So I go with the man, and my brother got mad. He told me that I should never go into a stranger's house again. And me, with an IQ of 0 at this point, didn't understand anything and was so confused. My brother told my parents, and they told me the same thing. So that's the whole story. Not exactly exciting, but if I was smart at the time, I would have been scared shitless. This happened back when I was in high school. At the time, I worked part-time in the grocery store, and it had become a tradition for a bunch of us to all go to some sort of haunt for Halloween. The first year, we went to a haunted forest and then a haunted corn maze. That began with me falling face first into a mud puddle. Seriously, this was at the very beginning, and then included things like getting stuck in a shed type building with a slew of Jason Voorhees characters, being chased by Leatherface, and other such fun things. It was fun. If I find the right subreddit, I might tell some of those stories sometime. Anyway, I want to say that this is our third year doing this. We all headed to a haunted factory in a nearby city. As it was before the advent of cell phones, we relied on printed directions. Because of the size of our group, we traveled in 3 cars, and I was in the last car of the caravan with my coworkers, Noel and Janie. We got lost because the people at the head of the group were terrible at navigation, and we ended up at a rough part of the city. At one point, we drove by a parking garage and heard someone scream. Eventually, our car got separated from the rest of the group at a stoplight, and by the time it turned green, we lost everyone else. We drove around for a while, talking to each other on the phone and trying to find each other. I was in the back seat talking to someone in the first car, Laura, and trying to direct my driver, Noel, while Laura tried to do the same with her husband, who was driving their car. It was not going well. Eventually I was like, Noel, just pull over somewhere and let them come find us. Now there were a lot of places Noel could have pulled over, like a Burger King or office building parking lot, but he chose the parking lot of a shady bar. Why? I have no idea. Perhaps it was because there was a large key bank sign nearby that served as a good landmark for the others to find us. So we were waiting in this lot for the others when a line of 7 cars pulled into the bar. This wasn't so surprising since it was a Friday night, but they didn't park normally. No, they surrounded us, the front end of the cars pointing towards us. And because of their closeness, there's no space for us to drive out of there. We were trapped. For a few minutes, they just stared at us from their cars, and then they started to get out and walk towards us in masses. There's about 10 rough-looking guys, and at this point, I was convinced that we were about to get robbed. Get your wallet out, I told Noelle and Janie, as I did the same. I didn't have much money anyway, to be honest, which worried me because I wondered what they would do if it wasn't enough. I was terrified but was trying to keep calm, and Noelle seemed generally not worried, but I can't believe he wasn't at least somewhat concerned, especially given his car contained both the teenager, me, and his girlfriend, Janie. As for Janie, she was so scared that she was crying. The guy I presumed to be the leader reached the front door first, approaching the passenger side where Janie and I were. He looked inside the car at us for a moment, and then he and his group all went back to their cars and parked normally. Well, I wasn't taking any chances and ordered very sternly, "Noelle, go to the Burger King, for God's sake." We eventually grouped up with everyone else and made it to the factory, which was far less scarier than what we had just endured. It maybe doesn't sound scary, but I really fucking was. I have a few theories. 1. The guys got out of the car and saw that we probably didn't have much to offer and changed their minds about mugging us. However, this seems unlikely. 2. They thought we were someone else until they reached the car and looked inside. Definitely possible. And 3. They were just fucking with us. Whatever the reason, I was truly scared, and to this day, 13 years later, I regard the city with caution. Here's my creepy pizza delivery story from college. When I was in college, I got a job delivering pizzas late at night. Typically, I would work until 2 a.m. It was a shitty job, and the shop was extremely dirty and unsanitary, as well as falling apart. But I typically made really good tips, so it was worth it. I was 18 at the time, and I'm female. It was summertime in Colorado, so even at night, it was still fairly warm. Important details for later. This was the second weekend on the job, and I was still getting used to it. I'm already a paranoid person, so I preferred just dropping off the pizza, taking my tip, and then leaving right away for the next delivery. I pretty much never went in someone's house, and if I did, I would just step in real quick, but leave the door open. It was pretty close to midnight when I got the delivery to a house on the east side of town. It was supposed to be my last delivery of the night. I pulled up to the house, and it looked pretty normal from the outside. The street was really dark, but I didn't feel uncomfortable. I walked to the door and knocked. This big shirtless old dude with a beer belly answers the door and tells me to come inside. I got weird vibes from him right off the bat. I declined to come in and tried to give him the pizza right there. But then he goes, "Come inside. It's freezing out, and we don't want the cold air coming in." This didn't make sense to me, as it was summer. So stupidly, I get nervous, and I take one step inside the house, not going all the way through. Then he goes, "No, come all the way in. It's cold out." I should have left at this point, but I was freaked out, not thinking straight. So I went in, and he closed both the screen door and the main door behind me. I'm trying to calm myself down, telling myself I'm overreacting. He then yells to his wife that the pizza's here. I could see her in the kitchen cooking, which seemed weird that she ordered pizza but was also cooking. I don't know. I look around their living room, and it's filled to the brim with stuffed animals, completely covering the couches, tables, windowsills, everything. Gave me a really weird vibe. Then his wife comes into the living room holding something outstretched in her hand. She walks up to me, and I see that it's some kind of bread or cake. She goes, "Eat this banana bread, and don't worry, it's not poisonous." What the fuck? I try to politely decline, lying and saying that I'm on a diet. She just stares at me, still with her hand outstretched, waiting for me to take the bread. I didn't take it, and then she got really upset. She starts yelling at me to eat the bread. I decline again, but this time, I'm not trying to be polite. I tell the couple that I really have to get back to work. I'm still holding the pizzas too, and thinking about just running out the door at this point. She gives up on trying to make me eat the bread and walks back into the kitchen. Then the man's like, "Let me find some change for your tip." He starts looking around the living room, digging through the couch cushions, trying to find change to give me. I tell him to forget it and I don't need a tip, that he can just take the pizza, but he insists on finding a tip for me. He spends the next several minutes searching his stuffed animal infested living room for change, and I start to think to myself, maybe he's trying to stall me. Most people have the tip ready when I get to their house. I was so worked up at that point that I just tell dude I'm leaving and start to open the door. He took the pizza and gave me a few quarters that he found. I booked it out of there and went back to the shop. I told my supervisor what happened and he didn't seem to care. He just sent me on another delivery. I was pissed. I don't know if that couple was actually creepy or just really socially awkward, but I never delivered to that house again. On my first summer back home, from freshman year of college, I picked up a part-time job delivering pizzas in my town, around 30 minutes from where I lived. The area in rural Georgia is known for having places in the middle of nowhere, and the pizza place whole shtick was that it delivered to even the most remote areas imaginable within the town limits. I could fill books with the weird experiences from that summer. From the call that came in from a long abandoned warehouse to a dog that got excited about the pizza in my hand and accidentally shredded my pants with her claws. But one will always stand out in my mind as the creepiest. It was fairly late at night, around 10:30 p.m., so I was confident at this time that I would be set on no further calls before closing at 11 p.m. However, someone barely managed to miss the cutoff time, and our clerk accepted their order since they were so close. I was given the address and a single box of hot dough and set on my merry little way. The first red flag was the driveway, or rather, the lack thereof. There was a mailbox, but no actual driveway, not even gravel. It was just grass and barely distinguishable trodden pathway that resembled more of a service trail than it did something frequently used. I bumped along, wondering if I was en route to the place, when I saw a slightly above average sized house come over the horizon, horribly dilapidated and completely surrounded with overgrown woods. I guesstimated where the rest of the driveway led and ended up parking in a grassy patch that could have been a walkway just as easily as it could have been the front yard. My headlights were aimed towards the porch, as per company policy. I walk up to the door, but I believe that calling it a door is generous. It was a door frame, alright, but the door itself was a large slab of wood, propped haphazardly against the side of the house, barely covering the entrance. This was red flag number 2. The third and fourth red flag were also the door. This included an A4 sheet of printer paper with the words, "Around back," scribbled in all caps, which was hanging just below the place where someone had self-engraved the door with the title, "Manson Family Ranch." Typically, I would not go around the back of the house, especially a shady, unlit house, and especially at night. However, it was my last drop off of the day, and I was ready to get it over with and be on my way home. Against better judgment, I trapezed over the back of the house. The door back here is actually a door, but it's covered with black cobwebs and fresh spider webs. Clearly this door has not been used in some time. I found the cleanest area available and knocked. I counted to 45 and knocked again. There were no lights on in the house, and I could hear no movement from inside. I knocked and counted again, and repeated the sequence 3 more times before I was finally creeped out enough and decided to return to my car. As I turned, I finally heard a voice coming from inside the house, clearly agitated, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. I tried to knock 1 more time, and I was counting, and I heard something in the woods behind me. It started out as just movement deep in the trees, but soon enough I could make out distinct running footsteps coming directly towards me through the brush. As I'm standing there, coming to terms with my impending demise, I followed the direction of the noise to the edge of the woods, which is around 15 feet away from me. In the moonlight, I could clearly see the woman who stepped out. She was relatively old, maybe in her 60s, I would guess. She had long blonde gray hair, which was tangled and matted and hung down past her hips. She was in what looked like to be originally a white nightgown, but at this time it was dingy and closer to beige brown color. She was absolutely barefoot, and her feet were covered with dirt and what had to be blood, presumably due to the fact that she had just sprinted through the prickly woods where there's no trail to be seen. I never learned her name, but I still referred to her as Red Flag Number 5. She stopped short when she saw me and started to shake her head no, eyes wide. I stood there like a terrified deer in the most fucked up headlights ever as she took a few more steps towards me, reaching out to me, fingers pointed. Her voice came out way stronger than mine would have been at that time. You know how Southern people can either sound like loving grandmothers or backwoods murderers? Well, she sounded like the latter when she drawled, "Oh, no, honey, no, you get on, you get out of here." I wish I could say I listened, I ran, I left, but I was so in shock at how the events were playing out that my own self-preservation was put on the back burner when I tried to figure out just what in the Kentucky Fried Fuck was happening. She seemed to realize that I was not moving, even if I could not make my mouth move to ask her what was happening, or even what to do with the stupid pizza in my hands. She looked at me like she could have smacked the hell out of me right then and there, and proceeded to deliver red flags 6 through 12. "Darling, you hear me? You deaf or dumb? Young girls like you come out here and they don't get to leave." So I finally quit being the white person in a horror movie when I realized that this was not a funny little ghost story. This was a 5'3", 116 pounds me potentially being targeted to be robbed or kidnapped or worse. So I dropped the dumb little pizza, which had serious serial killer toppings by the way, and started running back to my car, which I stupidly left on and unlocked, as was my usual for most of my deliveries. As I neared my car, I heard the slam from behind me. I looked over my shoulder to see the wooden door had been pushed over and had fallen into the porch beneath. As I'm closing into the car door, an older man was limping down the front steps, waving his arms like an airplane runway attendant to me, calling me little bitch, telling me to get out of the fucking car, now. At a loss for what to do, I called out something muttering and shaky along the lines of, "Pizza out back." I floored my dad's shitty late 90s Lexus and somehow managed to avoid the trees on the old trail back to the main road, which was still 12 miles and several turns from the road that actually had a name, let alone painted lines. I reported it to my manager, and he said that he would contact the police, but nothing ever came of it that I'm aware of. Either way, this was my first and hopefully last personal encounter with a self-proclaimed Manson family ranch. I was about 10 at the time that this happened, and even after 13 years, I feel so gross and uneasy thinking about it. My mother bought me Heelys when they had come out, and I practiced day and night to skate with them so that I could do it in public without looking silly. I remember I mastered it and was always so happy to skate around Walmart getting stuff for my mom and bringing it back to the cart while she did her shopping a couple aisles down. It made the trips go faster, and I enjoyed helping. My mother had a habit of going to Walmart after 12 a.m. though, because she didn't like lines and people. It was always a much more carefree feeling during that time, so I didn't care. I enjoyed being out of the house. This was all very common. I say all of this because it was another 1 a.m. trip to Walmart for me and my mom, and since it was so common and so empty, she wasn't at all concerned to watch over me or where I went. She knew either I'd find her, or worst case, she would find me in the video game section. So I was skating around just looking at different stuff in different aisles. An employee in the dishes section told me to stop skating in the store. He was a short and chubby older guy. I wasn't one to argue, and I got told that often. So I say, okay. I walked into another aisle, and then skated into the frozen meat section, rolling my eyes. I remember thinking how stupid it was for an employee to be upset that I had brought my Heelys into the store. When I heard some guy behind me yell, "Hey!" I ignored it at first. My mother had just turned the corner at the far end of the long aisle, and I was focused on catching up. Then a guy yells, "Hey you, kid!" I stopped immediately and turned around. This time, it wasn't the heavy-set older guy. It was a younger, skinny guy, maybe in his mid-30s. He had short, greasy black hair, and some facial hair as well. He was storming up to me, and immediately, my stomach started sinking. Something about him just felt off. Looking back now, he looked like a tweaker. His right eye twitched slightly a few times, and even though he was looking at me, he wasn't looking me in the eye at all. His hand twitched a couple times too while he was coming up to me, and his face was slightly turned down instead of straight. I expected him to lecture me on skating, and at first he did. "You shouldn't be skating in the store," he said. He didn't yell, but it was very forceful in a lowered voice. "Sorry," I replied. I started backing up because this guy kept advancing though, until I was backed up against one of those lower coolers that were in the middle of the Walmart aisles. He walked right up to me, literally on top of me. His whole body was just a couple inches from me. I got scared, and I remember feeling so sick. I remember panicking and hoping that my mom would turn back around. I honestly don't know why I didn't yell for her. He put his hands on either side of me on the cooler and then leans in like he's trying to kiss me. I immediately looked away, so his mouth just ended up a couple inches from my ear instead, and he starts quietly talking to me while shifting his weight between his feet. It was like he couldn't stand still, or like he was trying to decide if he should get even closer. "Why are you skating here? You know that's bad, right? You're gonna get in trouble." All while saying this, the fucking creep was waving his head back and forth like he was trying to get an angle to kiss me. I just kept abruptly turning my head and looking at the floor. He continues, "You should be a good girl. Can you be a good girl for me? Stop skating around here like that?" "Yeah, sorry," I mumbled, trying to shrink away. He kept talking for a minute or two, but I tuned him out and just kept repeating, "Yeah, okay," just willing him to quit, having made his point. He then raises one hand like he's gonna cut my face. Before he could, he stops and his head snapped back. He looks off at something behind me, then drops his hand and backs away. He backed up until he was between the two side aisles, and I quickly bolted down the aisle. I could feel him watching me as I went, but I never looked back. When I got to the end of the aisle, my mom wasn't there, but an old lady was, and she had been coming up the aisle towards me. I ran past her till I found my mom 3 aisles away. I never told my mom what happened, but I stayed by her the whole rest of the time. I felt disgusted and scared and was internally freaked out, but I didn't tell her. I don't know if I thought maybe I would get in trouble or what, honestly. But I was looking over my shoulder the rest of the time, trying to spot him. I never saw him again, not that time or any other time after. I never felt comfortable being on that side of the store again by myself. I will say, in a weird twist, it did not deter me from skating in Walmart though. Just a creepy Walmart employee. I hope we never meet again, and I hope you get some fucking help. So this takes place in August of last year, right before I moved to a different state for school. This story involves myself, 18 at the time, and my sister and cousin, both 14 at the time. And on the day in question, we decided to go on what we call an Uzi adventure, where we basically get in the car and drive until we find something to do. That day, we decided to go to Target, but instead of the one that we usually go to, we decided to go to a different one that was in the south end of the city we lived near. A little background about the area I lived in. I grew up most of my life outside of Detroit. The part of this area I lived in was more of a suburban, downtown side of the south end. It was known for all the weird, dangerous people living down there. For example, a few months before this incident, a boy was shot walking to school by some retired firefighter for asking for directions, and just this year, a lady was found nude, attacked, strangled, and bitten multiple times in the face by an attacker at her apartment just down the road from the Target, but thankfully, she survived. Anyways, for some reason, I still don't know why we decided to go to the South Target instead of our usual one. We got there, and my sister and cousins get a couple of things for school while I pick up a CD. We check out, and we get out to the car when we see a green Chevy Trailblazer is now parked next to my car. I didn't notice anything besides the fact that the driver's seat was reclined all the way back, the window was slightly open, and it looked like someone was sleeping in the car. My sister gets in the passenger seat, and my cousin right behind her. And literally, the second she got into the car, she said, drive now." I didn't really think much though, because she didn't sound panicked or anything. So I drive, and once we pull out to the main road, she told me that when she saw the old man lying in the driver's seat, he was jerking off to people walking past, more specifically children and their moms walking past. My cousin then says that she saw him too, and of course we freaked the fuck out and tried to decide what to do. We ended up pulling over into a Staples parking lot and sitting there trying to decide if we should call the cops. My sister is crying at this point and having an anxiety attack because she thought that she would get in trouble with our parents for calling the cops. Eventually, I convinced my cousin to call 911 and put in a report because my sister was still crying about not wanting to call the cops, and I suck at phone calls. Maybe a half an hour later, after the incident, we had a call from the police pretty much telling us that they found him in the car with his pants off and his tic tac out, and that he was a repeated offender and had done this apparently extremely often. They told us that we needed to come down to the station and file an official report. At this point, our parents had no idea what was going on, and I'm not sure we wanted them to know, specifically my aunt, because she is known to blow stuff extremely out of proportion, and would probably never let my cousin leave the house again. But now that we were going to be at the station, we had no other choice but to tell them. So we tell our parents, and my mom, dad, brother, aunt, uncle, and cousin meet us at the station. I also remember that there was maybe 1 or 2 police officers on duty that night, and we had to wait a couple hours while they called the detective at his house, and he ended up interviewing us in his pajamas in the fax room. Months later, I was at school in another state when I got a subpoena to come to court. We ended up having to go to court 2 separate times, and I would have to fly home for a month or 2 the second time because he had appealed or something, before eventually pleading guilty the second time around. And he's now out on parole after pretty much serving no jail time. To end the story off, we don't go to that Target anymore, and the last time I heard about this was a call from his parole officer asking pretty much my viewpoint and if I had to go to therapy because of it. I guess on the lighter note, because my family and I have a warped sense of humor, we now refer to this as the pickle tickler incident. Anyways, 74-year-old man we found tickling his pickle in the car to little kids and caused us to spend hours at the police station. Let's not meet again. At the time, I was about 5, and I was living in an area of Florida that surprisingly was one of the most prevalent spots for human trafficking in the country, apart from the big cities. It's cleaned up now, but at the time I thought this area was pretty nice. My mom has never been that great, so when she took me to Target, I pretty much knew the drill. No tantrums, no asking for anything, and no wandering. I can't quite remember why we went to Target, but I remember us passing through the pillow aisle. Some part of my kid brain wanted to test out the comfort levels of all the pillows, so I kneeled on the ground and told my mom to wait. She stared at me for a few seconds and said something along the lines of, "Hurry up, I don't have time for this," before disappearing around the corner. I don't really think she left me there on purpose. Maybe she thought I would get scared for being apart from her and scramble quickly to follow her. I tested out 2 pillows before getting freaked out, and I went looking for her. She had vanished. I began calling her name, and I remember she told me to go to the front if I ever got lost, but the Target was so big that I got confused. A woman grabbed me by the wrist. She wore a bluish green blouse and had dark hair, but I think it was a wig. It didn't look right. She started pulling me to the front of the store, and I began to cry really loudly. I shouted for my mom while this woman dragged me out, and we got to the automatic doors before my mom barreled out of the aisles and grabbed me out of the woman's grip. The woman ran out of the store quickly, and I only remember this because of how my mom gripped my face and screamed at me to never walk away from her again. Even though she left me, she apparently forgot about this. After that, I never wandered, but I recently learned that Targets are known for their kidnappings. Pretty strange to think what I might be doing now if that woman actually kidnapped me. Would I even be alive? Pretty sure if my mom didn't find me, a few seconds later I would have been gone for good. When I lived in the city, going to Target was a daily thing. I had to go find some pants to wear to a party, so I went to Target to see what they had, and if I could find anything that I liked. I noticed this guy had walked in right behind me, and every time I turned around, he just happened to be there. So I thought it was just a coincidence, and maybe he was into the same stuff as I was, since we always ended up on the same aisle at some point. I had walked over to the makeup to look for some new foundation, because mine was gone, and I just happened to turn around and he was standing right there in front of some makeup. So at that point, I knew something was up. He wasn't holding anything and was just standing around trying not to make eye contact with me every time I looked at him. I walked out to the checkout line because I wasn't feeling comfortable anymore, and I had a gut feeling that if I stayed in the store, that something would end up happening. He followed me over to the checkout line, again, with nothing in his hands, so he had nothing to pay for. He just stood there looking around every time I looked at him. He was acting like I couldn't see him or even feel him looking at me. I paid and grabbed my stuff, and I was walking out the door, but I didn't want him to follow me to my car, so instead I walked out the other end of the store to go to the bathroom. He didn't follow me to begin with, but when I walked out of the bathroom, he was standing there right in the men's section looking at underwear and socks. Again, not holding a single thing, but just watching me. So I walked around some more, just to see if he would follow me again, and he did. I found a manager and pulled him to the side and whispered to him that an older man had been following me around the store the whole time that I'd been in here, and that I didn't feel safe enough to walk to my car alone, so I'd just been walking around trying to lose him. The manager told me that people have been caught trying to kidnap people for sex trafficking, and they had a prior incident a couple months ago. He told me that it was smart to stay in the store. He called the police, but the guy left the store before he showed up. If you ever have a gut feeling, please listen to it. That day could have ended a lot worse for me. Creepy guy in Target, let's not meet again. So this didn't happen when I was a child, because I'm still a child. I'm a stupid teenager. It happened maybe a couple weeks ago, when my brother decided to take me and my older brother to go to Best Buy. By the time we were all in the parking lot, I realized I had forgotten my mask, and there were only 2 for both my brothers. Now, since you're not allowed to go to this Best Buy without a mask on, I just decided that I would stay in the car in the parking lot. Then, because I'm indecisive, I got out and followed him. Then, because I'm still indecisive, I bailed at the last second because I didn't feel like going in and having to be around people. I turned back around and headed for the car. By this time, both my brothers were inside. I get to the car and it turns out my brother had locked it and I couldn't get inside. Whoop-de-doo. Now I'm stuck out in the sun of a rundown Best Buy parking lot, leaning uncomfortably against a car, completely out in the open. I couldn't go anywhere for shelter. It was a really odd, vulnerable feeling. So anyway, I'd been standing there for at least a long, painful 10 minutes now, and this other old car just seems to roll right into the parking lot. As soon as I see him, I get nervous because trafficking has been reaching crazy highs around here. But I dismiss it as nothing. Obviously, he's going to park, right? Nope. He just starts circling me, driving in circles around the parking lot, looking right at me from every angle. This is when I started to panic. I didn't have my phone, so I tried to get out of the line of sight. I walked quickly to the shady side of the car and sat down behind the front wheel, knees to my chest. I could still hear him circling me, and I knew he was slowing down now. This may sound like I was just being paranoid, but I promise you that you would know that feeling if you were there. It was really creepy. So this guy is really close to where I am now and slows to a dead stop right next to the car. He opens the car door and is seconds away from stepping out when, praise God, my brother comes out from the front doors of Best Buy and calls my name, angry as hell for me being such a dumbass. This guy slams his door and takes off. I never saw that car after that. After that, we went to Best Buy because apparently they were providing masks. I'm a 16-year-old male, and I used to be a bit skeptical to all things paranormal until one weekend at an abandoned house. To give you some backstory, I was with my two best friends at the time, Danielle and Julia. We were home alone and bored at Danielle's house with nothing to do. I can't remember whose idea it was, but one of us had the idea to drive around on some of the old dirt roads and check out abandoned buildings. There were a lot of abandoned places, and where I live is pretty far out in the country, surrounded by either farms or woods. So we went to the first two old tobacco houses, took a few pictures, and just sort of goofed off. We got back on the road and saw an unkept driveway. Keep in mind, hardly anyone lives on this road. We decided to drive down the driveway, despite Julia saying that we shouldn't because it didn't feel right to her. Not the fact that it would be trespassing, but that she was getting extremely bad vibes about this place. However, Danielle and I insisted. We drove down it, and it was pretty far back in the woods. This is where weird things started to happen. We parked the truck in a little clearing and noticed an abandoned house in the distance. However, before we got out of the truck, the front sensor went off, beeping like crazy. So did the back one. It was as if something was walking around the truck. The weird thing is, we were parked in a clearing, so there was nothing that could make the sensors go off. Even if there were, it would have gone off before we even parked the truck, and wouldn't have just randomly gone off in that order. Danielle and Julia were kind of freaked out, but I just ignored it. It wasn't until later that this would freak me out too. We all got out of the truck and started walking towards the house. I was in front with my friends walking a decent distance behind me. If I'm honest, I was showing off and acting fearless. I wasn't that scared until I saw her, a woman. A woman with dingy, unkempt looking hair and a colonial style dress looking around the corner of the house. She looked at me and just kept her finger up to her lips and hushed me very loudly. The feeling I had is almost indescribable. Imagine feeling all senses of safety and protection is gone, and you don't feel at all happy. My heart felt like it stopped. I started crying. I was so scared. I knew she wasn't human. I don't know how, I just knew. I turned around to my friends and screamed, "Run!" and started sprinting back to the truck. My phone flew out of my pocket about halfway back to the truck. My friend Julia told me that this had happened, and I told her just leave it. Now if you know me, you know that if I'm ditching my phone, I'm serious. Julia and Danielle got back to the truck. We tried to open it, but it was locked. Danielle reached for the keys, but they were gone, and so was Julia's phone. It was as if whatever this thing was trying to keep us there. Danielle ran back to pick up Julia's and my phone and found our keys. We got in the truck and floored it out of there, back to Danielle's house. You might think that it's just coincidental that we dropped our things, but the thing is, our phones and Danielle's keys were deep in our pockets, and it didn't make much sense for them to fall out on their own like that. Later at the house, we were all talking about the entire situation, and I was explaining what I had seen. My friends didn't even hear the shush, nor did they see the woman. I was so afraid that they didn't believe me, but Julia reassured me that the look on my face and tears were proof enough to her to run as well. We later found out that there had been a few sightings of a ghost on that road by workers at the Fort Pickett, a military facility nearby. I'm a female, and at the time of this story I was 16. It was summer, so school was already out. My parents were hardly ever home since work kept them away. My little sister was staying out with my grandma. I had decided that night that I didn't want to be alone, so I called a couple friends to come over. While I was waiting for them to get there, I had gone up to my room. As I walked in, I got a really bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it felt as if I was being watched. Now, mind you, I was completely alone in the house upstairs on the second floor. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. I walked into my own bathroom to find all my hair products and jewelry on the floor, and the window was wide open. That was when I started to panic. My first thought was that we had an intruder, and I ran to get my dad's rifle in the closet. I kept it by me while I hid in the living room behind our couch. After about an hour passed, I started telling myself that I had just forgot to close my window and the wind knocked over my stuff on my counter. There was a knock on my door, and a wave of relief rushed over me. I ran to the door and opened it, only to find no one there. I slammed the door shut and started panicking again. Were some jerks messing with me, or was it something else? I didn't want to find out. At the time I was thinking, where the hell were my friends? Just when I took my phone, I heard a faint laugh come from inside my room. I sat and listened for a moment. It sounded like a little girl's laughter. Of course, that just freaked me the fuck out more. In the movies I watched, that usually means get out of there, and fast. But the laughing abruptly stopped. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. Just when I thought it was over, a huge bang came from the kitchen. All the pans had fallen off of the pot hanger. I was so scared, I couldn't move. Then I heard the little girl's voice again, though this time it was right behind me. And she whispered, "Help me." I turned so fast that I could have probably broke my neck. And surely, there was a girl in a blood-soaked white dress. I can't tell you how fast I booked it out of there, never looking back. I stayed outside until my friends got there. I ended up going to my friend's house. I never went back into the house again. This happened just yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm not quite sure what to think of it, because it was just so bizarre and unbelievable. I might have just been sleep deprived. So last night, maybe at 11 p.m., I was walking around my block. My town is relatively safe, so I didn't feel in danger. Plus it was a pretty night. I had been walking around for 5 minutes when a pale woman with blonde hair caught my eye from across the street. She was about my height and looked around my age too. I didn't actually pay attention to her after I first noticed her. I circled the block again, and she was on the same street, a couple feet in front of me. She was standing on the curb, staring at cars passing by. It was a main road, so even that late, people were still driving on it. I said hello to her, and she turned and gazed at me. I couldn't see her face super well, but from what I think I saw, she had no pupils or color in her eyes. She just stared at me. After a while, I asked her if she was okay. She didn't respond again and simply pointed to the road. I was really confused and didn't understand. Right as a red car started coming down the road, she stepped into the road. The car slammed into her, and it was a bloody mess. The driver immediately stopped and jumped out. It was a man in his mid-20s. We both spoke about it, freaking out. He called the police, and I went around the car to see the state of the girl. Once I circled around the car, she was gone. Not gone as in dead, gone as in she wasn't there. The blood on the road was gone too, but not gone from his car. After the police arrived, they concluded that it was a big hoax from a kid who doesn't know what they are talking about, and some guy who went along with it. A sample of the blood of the car was taken and found out to be paint. I'm still not sure what happened. I'm still not sure if what happened was real. It felt so real, but I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't know what it was, if it was a dream or if it was real, but I remember it like it was real. I feel like I can't leave the house now. I don't understand anything now, and I feel like I'm going crazy. Has anyone ever experienced something like this? Back in 2011, I was having a really bad time health-wise for the year before that year and the one after. My lungs filled up with fluid as soon as the cold weather hit, and I was in the hospital for at least 10 days at a time. 2011 was the worst. For reasons yet unknown to me, the specialist in charge of my care incorrectly diagnosed me with tuberculosis and gave me drugs that would either kill or cure me. It nearly killed me. It reacted poorly with my diabetes, and my lung specialist was a douchebag who didn't care that I was throwing up for 3 straight days. I almost died from ketoacidosis, and I was in the ICU for 3 days, in the hospital for 13. I also had a gnarly near-death experience, but that's for another story. While I was in the ICU, passing in and out of consciousness, and completely unaware of the passage of time, I hallucinated a cat. I'd be on the edge of sleep, and something would jump on the bed with me, chirp, and curl up so I could feel the warmth and purring. Sometimes he would knead my leg through the sheets, waking me up. I saw him come in the room only once. He was a big black, long-haired tomcat with an aggressively cheerful disposition and huge yellow eyes, such that I nicknamed him Lambert in my head. I even asked the nurses about him, half out of my skin I was, and that's when I realized that he wasn't a real animal. I made a promise in my head all the same. He had kept me going by letting me think there was one creature there with me 24/7, keeping me tethered to life. So if we meet again, I would return the favor and look after him however I could. Fast forward 8 years to 2019. My childhood cat, Lupin, had finally succumbed to old age. She was born in 2000, and to try to deal with the grief, I was Facebook scrolling through local cat sanctuaries and rescues, and who should I see but a kitten who was the same exact match to the hallucination, spirit, dream, or whatever that kept me wanting to stay alive back then. I was sure in that moment that I saw him, and I was even more sure when I went to meet him at the shelter. I saw the same white freckles on his shoulders that had less than inches away from my face as I drifted, and he purred in the hospital bed. Mom vetoed the name Lambert, so we called him Jet. He has chronic anxiety issues and no food security from being on the street for the first 3 months of his life, and he kept me on my goddamn toes while I was getting over the death of my friend. But he's got the softest fur ever, and is a chronic cuddler, and I owe him a lot. He still chirps when he jumps onto my bed. I'm not exactly a gold star believer. My philosophy is weird shit happens, but I'm inclined to look at the logical explanations first. I know I was super sick and my brain was throwing up all kinds of nonsense. I know that 8 years is a long time for memory to change, especially of such blurry and confused period. But emotionally, I can't shake the feeling that I met this cat nearly a decade before he was even born. I ghost hunt at the Mansfield Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio a lot. In fall of 2019, I had discovered someone lingering in the east showers. No one had known about him, so I kept him a secret for a bit. We got really close and I learned some things about him, and he visited me at my home, which isn't a problem for me. Mind you, I used my pendulum to speak to him. Months later, on another hunt, we discovered that he was being abused and was very badly hurt. He was hiding in a corner, scared for his life, so my father helped him out and escorted him to the hospital to get checked out. We went up a couple hours later, and he felt safe there, so we encouraged him to stay. After this happened, that's when I started to tell people of his existence and inform them of what had happened to him. When I first met him, I found out that he didn't know that he was dead. I felt like it wasn't my place to tell, and if it ever did become my place to tell, I knew that it was too soon. June 2020 rolls around. I invite some of my friends along with me to help my dad speak to him, because I knew that there was something that had to be talked about. Up in the hospital, another spirit had been harassing him and telling him what to do, and he couldn't escape it. My dad was helping him understand that he doesn't have to listen to this guy, especially because he has no superiority over him. He's basically just a guy who was trolling him. My dad started to slowly ease into it, asking him how it's possible that he hasn't eaten in a while, explaining to him that he's able to go through walls and leave rooms whenever he wants, telling him that he can leave whenever this troll is harassing him. My anxiety and intuition started to rise, but the anxiety wasn't my own. I knew that straight away. Something was telling me that he was nervous about what my dad was saying to him. I ended up taking over and explaining how we're all dressed differently, how we were all wearing masks because of the pandemic, because it's 2020, not the 1890s. I said, "Do you know where I'm getting at?" And my pendulum responded with yes. And right after that, I could feel tears coming. I said, "I can't do it." I couldn't tell him he was dead, but he already knew. I started crying really hard and felt a huge pang in my chest, the kind you feel when you have just been told a loved one has died. And I knew I wasn't crying, it was him crying. I've never felt another's emotions before, and the pain I felt, I knew was his, and so did everyone else that witnessed it. A friend who took an audio recording of the session told me that she heard a male's voice say, "Dead?" after I asked him where I was getting at. And when she played it for me, I heard it too, and we knew it was him. I cried for a good couple of minutes and was telling my dad how heartbroken he was to hear that. It was very hard for the both of us, but eventually, he grew to accept it. Ever since then, I've been sensitive and sometimes feel the emotions of the spirits I speak to. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's not there. It was one hell of an experience, but I love him to death, and I hope I never lose him. That's how close we have become. I was told we have a special connection, and I don't doubt because I feel it. Anyways, thanks for listening to my experience. I've been wanting to share it somewhere. So I've never really talked about this, but it all started 3 years ago when I was talking to this girl for a little bit. Her name was Natalie. She lived in an older house and had the entire basement to herself. I remember her saying things like how her house was haunted. I didn't really believe her until this one night. So me and my friend Nick are spending the night at her house, and I remember my friend laying down on the couch at like 9:30, and he was just staring blankly at the wall. I didn't think anything was wrong, and I thought he was just messing around, so I started calling his name. "Yo, Nick, Nick, Nick." Nothing I said could get a response from him. Meanwhile, I was across the room and Natalie was sitting on her bed. After about a minute of him just staring blankly, he jumps off the couch and says, "I don't mess with that. I don't mess with that." Freaking out, and Natalie started laughing. It didn't really dawn on me until later that I think she knew what was happening. Anyways, I started laughing too, thinking it was a joke. About 5 minutes pass and he calms down and sits back on the couch. This is where things get a little creepy and interesting. She had a screen door in her room that opened outside. I specifically remember as soon as I took 2 steps out of her room, every single light in her room, including outlets, all blew out and it was pitch black. It got really creepy for a second. We tried everything, and the only thing in her room that would work was a lamp next to the couch, right next to Nick's head. Anyways, this was all kind of new to me, and I didn't really know what to think about the situation. I then remembered things getting weird in the room. Like Natalie was getting super agitated over the littlest things and wouldn't let me sleep in her bed. So I was like, whatever, I'll just sleep on the floor at the foot of her bed. I remember I couldn't fall asleep that night. I was laying there for a while everyone else was asleep when I had this sleep paralysis type of feeling. I couldn't move or anything. I remember this happened to me once when I was young. And all I could think to do was to pray and start saying the Our Father prayer in my head. When about halfway through it, it stopped and I just tried to go back to bed. About 30 seconds pass and it hits me again that I can't move. This is giving me chills as I type this. So I start praying again and halfway through the prayers it stops. At this point I was like, whatever this is gone. Until about 30 seconds pass again, and this time it's much more frightening. I remember it felt like someone plunged me onto an outlet, like I was being shocked through my whole body, and I was kind of shaking or whatever. It was just holding me down. I remember trying to move my arms as hard as I could to rip the blanket off of Nick to wake him up and help me. But in my head, I was saying Our Fathers, and it left halfway through again. At this point I was freaking out. I was literally scared for the next few months after this, and I slept in the same room as my mom for a month or so. It took me a while to kind of make sense of what happened that night, but I think some entity or demon or something, I don't know, tried messing with my friend Nick, and when I laughed and taunted it, it targeted me. But this story is not over. So this happened about 2 years ago when I moved into my new house, which I still live in today. I remember my aunt was visiting, and it was late night, around 2 a.m. I was just chilling, playing video games, doing my thing when I hear a weird sound to my left and right. I had my gaming headset on, so I ignored it and kept playing. When I thought I heard the same sound for the second time from behind my bed, I took my headset off and waited, trying to hear it again to find out what it was. I sat there for like 2 minutes, just waiting, when I heard the sound right next to me. Woo. It's literally all I could make out, and it was just weird and creeped me the fuck out. So I ran to my mom's room and told her something was making sounds in my room. And she was like, oh, it's probably the sprinkler system or some other shit outside, and went outside to look. I remember I walked back into the hall to my room and stood there waiting for my mom to come back inside. When I literally heard the loudest woo in my ear, I ran out of the house crying and freaking out, and my mom thought I was crazy. I remember hearing a voice another time while I was trying to sleep, and I just kept telling it to go away. Since then I haven't heard any other crazy shit, though I do get sleep paralysis sometimes. The most recent experience, I had what was like a presence of a woman in my room, and I couldn't move. I don't know, all this stuff is just kind of creepy to me. When I was younger in the 60s, we lived in an old house built before the Civil War. It was up in Oldham County, Kentucky, in an area known as the Devil's Backbone, on Dawkins Road. I was around 12 years old and had an encounter I would never forget. One night, I was unable to sleep and I was laying on my side when I got this very uncomfortable feeling. I turned on my back and saw a young man with dark hair and a mustache staring at me from the foot of my bed. He was wearing clothing from the 1800s. I looked at him for a while before I lost my nerve and ducked under the covers. When I looked back up, he was gone. Several weeks later, I was upstairs in my brother's room and I was home alone. Suddenly, someone loudly ran up the stairs to the door. I opened it only to find a cold breeze. I left the house until everyone else came home. Sometime later, I was in town with my dad. We met an old man that said he lived in the house when he was a boy. He said the house was haunted and that a young musician hung himself from the second-story window, which was my brother's room. I'm a water treatment plant operator. Been doing this for about a decade. I've been the night shift guy my whole career. The nights are normally quiet and can be boring if everything is going as planned. My plant has a few different buildings. The oldest is 60 or so years old. The main building is where I spend the majority of my night shifts, and is only roughly 20 years old. For more backstory of the area, this used to be a booming, energized area. This area was littered with railroad tracks and drifters coming and going on the trains. Our farms and factories were very bountiful back then. Now that you all understand that with success in the area, there's also a darkness. From the settling of the area, wars with natives, and even into the 30s and 40s of people being killed on train wrecks and bad business deals, the grounds are laced with darkness. The silence of night shifts can be eerie all on its own. Lots of bumps and bangs in the dimly lit darkness. On the night that I'm about to speak about, everything started as normal. I came around sunset, got the nightly Passover, and began my work. Around midnight, I had to do my rounds around the whole property while getting the nightly pump numbers. I made my rounds with nothing but a flashlight around the main building. The oldest building is good walking distance away from the main building. I set out in the darkness, heading for that building. I must also add that we aren't in the nicest area of the town. However, I'm a big guy, and I can hold my own. As I made my walk, I got an uneasy feeling. I've gotten this before, but I have a job to do, and nothing came of it. I rounded the corner and unlocked the door. As I did this, the hairs on my back and neck stood up. Again, I have a job to do though. I opened the door and there stood nothing. I walked in and proceeded to get my numbers. As I turned to shut the door, I looked down the hallway to see a woman in pure white looking at me through the other door. I almost jumped out of my boots and pissed myself a little. As I came back to reality, I once again made eye contact with this entity. As soon as I met her gaze, everything in me said, "Hey, your life is in danger, buddy." Her face was distorted and started to shift around. I was now frozen as she shifted into what looked like an Indian warrior. His eyes were glowing. As I got to my feet, he shifted into a huge wolf creature. The growls were chilling to say the least. It snarled, then ran towards me. I didn't even have time to shut the door. I ran as fast as I could, screaming bloody murder. I felt as if it was trying to bite my backside. It got a hold of my pant leg and tore it to shreds. I stumbled and rolled, but somehow managed to get back on my feet. I darted to the main building, and as I shut the door, I heard a loud thud on the other side. I locked the doors and cowered inside. I could hear the thing growling and scratching at the walls. I got the courage to look out the window, just to end up face to face with the white lady again. I called the police and had them sit with me until the sun came up. No one else has ever seen the white lady since. It's still quite freaky, but I had a job to do. Please, someone, help us. We don't know what to do. It's getting so bad. It's been bad over the last 20 years, but this is the worst by far. Both of my parents grew up in haunted houses, and of course my siblings and I have all grown up in haunted houses as well. At first my parents thought my brother just had an imaginary friend. His name was Joe, and he lived in the closet. My brother woke up screaming in the middle of the night when I was a baby, so I don't remember. My parents ran in there, and he had blood all over his sheets, and 3 very long cuts on his back. They had bunk beds, and my brother was on the bottom. My parents said he was pale and wouldn't say a word. Things calmed down for a really long time, until I was 10. I had one of my friends stay over, and we were staying up really late, playing games, and doing what little girls do. We started hearing scratching sounds coming from outside my door. I had a cat, so I thought it was her. So I went to open the door, but there was nothing there. We ended up shrugging it off. Then it started again, and the doorknob started to jiggle, and it slowly opened. There was a dark figure standing there, looking at us. It was out of breath, and its shoulders were going up and down. Then it lunged at us and we screamed, causing my parents to come in running. Nothing and nobody was in the house. My friend never stayed the night at my house again, and we stopped being friends shortly after. 9 years later, just little things were happening, nothing too scary. My boyfriend went off to basic training, and I still lived with my parents when I was 19. I had a dog, Zeus, who was sleeping on my bed, and he's a yellow lab. It was 6:30 in the morning, and I had to be up at 8:30 for work. He woke me up growling. Then I heard a weird voice in my ear speaking a language I didn't understand. When I started to open my eyes, it started growling in my ears. I opened my eyes fast and my door slammed. My dog was standing over me, with his hair standing up, looking like he was about to attack someone. Everyone was already at work and I heard banging coming from my parents' room. I got Zeus off of me and jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room. The cabinets were opening and closing fast and things were being thrown everywhere around the room. It wouldn't stop. I turned around and went to run out, but the door slammed shut. My dog was running around the house barking and growling and started running into the door. I said screw it and ran out and grabbed some work clothes and got my dog and got the hell out. I dropped off my dog at my friend's house and went to work early. When I got home, my parents' room was destroyed. My mother was crying and my dad was pissed. I told them everything and we decided not to talk about it again and went on with the rest of the night. My brother still lived with my parents as well. That night, his door kept opening and closing, and I kept hearing running in the hallway, so I thought it was him. I slipped on my slippers and stomped to his room. I was gonna yell at him to knock off his stupid shit, and when I opened the door, he was snoring. I woke him up and he promised me it wasn't him. He told me to leave his door open to see if anything happens again. I'm halfway down the hallway and my brother yells at me to run to my room and not to look back. But of course, I turn around instead. As I turned around, I see a large black figure standing in the doorway staring at me. It had large red eyes. I froze and started to whimper. My brother, being the protective big brother, came charging out of his room, telling the thing to leave me alone, and then it disappeared. My brother ran to me and led me to my room and slept on the floor all night. I didn't sleep. Now a year later, I'm 21. My husband is away in the army at the moment, and we are waiting for our plumbing to be done at our new house. Last night we had a bad rainstorm. I woke up to growling again and couldn't move. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure with red eyes just staring at me, and it opened its mouth so wide it could fit my whole head in its mouth. It had huge sharp teeth and a long skinny tongue. It screamed in my ear and my ears started to ring. I wanted to cover them, but I couldn't. My parents come running into my room, covering their ears, but it stopped mid-run when they saw the thing. My dad came running to me and picked me up and carried me to his room, and Zeus followed. I was finally able to move and started shaking uncontrollably. My brother still lives there, as well as his girlfriend. We heard her scream, and then she started banging on the door, and then my dad opened it, and she came running in, crying and shaking. We all started to ask where my brother was. Before she could answer, he came out of his room on his hands and feet with black eyes, just staring at us. We all froze, none of us knew what to do. My brother then popped his neck and started running for us. My dad slammed his door shut and locked it. My brother ran right into it. My mom was screaming for it to get the hell out of the house and just kept repeating this while things were being thrown, then it goes quiet. My dad opens the door and my brother was passed out on the floor with his nose bleeding. When my brother woke up, we told him everything. He didn't remember a thing, but remembers hearing screaming, and then it all went black. Nobody slept last night, and we all called in and are trying to figure this out. Now it's the next night, and it's 11 o'clock. We are hearing growling and scratching through the entire house. We can't do this again. Please help. I will keep you updated as soon as I can. Thank you.